Good morning. All at once. The hour of convening having arrived, the Senate will now come to order. At this time, I would like to ask all unauthorized persons to exit the chamber. I'd like to recognize my good friend, Senator from Chickamauga.
Mr. President, what a glorious day it is at our state capitol. The sun's up, it's shining, it's warming up, and the members of the state Senate are hot to make Georgia better for the people they represent. A moment in history. Today in 1979, Ray Charles performed the Georgia on My Mind in a joint session because that song was under consideration to be the state song, which was adopted later on. Also, the man from Ocilla told me that at night, as he put on his pajamas with the feet in them, that he has a bowl of cereal every night because today is National Cereal Day. The journal's been read and found to be correct.
Your wisdom continues to be on display. Is there objection to dispensing with the reading of the journal? Hearing none, the reading of the journal is dispensed with. Are there any motions to reconsider? Chair hears none. Is there objection to the confirmation of the journal? The chair hears none, and the journal is confirmed. All senators who have bills and resolutions to introduce, please bring them up to the Secretary's desk at this time. Mr. Secretary, will you read first reading and reference of Senate bills and resolutions, please?
Senate Bill 234 by Senator Harper of the 7th, a bill to title an act to provided that the judge of the probate court of Atkinson County shall also serve as the chief magistrate judge of the magistrate court of Atkinson.
State and local government.
Senate Bill 235 by Senator Kirk of the 13th, a bill to be titled an act to repeal an act creating public body, corporate and politic, and an instrumentality of the county of Sumter to be known as the Sumter County Livestock.
State and local government.
Senate Bill 236 by Senator Kirk of the 13th, a bill to be titled an act to repeal an act providing that the tax commissioner of Lee County shall retain a percentage of the educational funds collected.
State and local government.
Senate Resolution 299 by Senator Ligon III, a resolution honoring the workers of the Woodbine Thiokol Chemical Plant.
Transportation.
Mr. President, that concludes the order.
First reading and reference of House bills and resolutions, please.
House Bill 12 by Representative Williams, the 145th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Part 15 of Article 6 of Chapter 2 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to miscellaneous provisions of the Quality Basic Education. House Bill 79 by Representative Gilliard of the 162nd, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Chapter 4 of Title 30 of the OCGA relating to rights of persons with disabilities.
Judiciary.
House Bill 101 by Representative Ridley of the 6th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Title 40 in Code Section 48.504.40 of the OCGA relating to motor vehicles and watercraft and all-terrain vehicles held in
Finance.
House Bill 120 by Representative Morris of the 26th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend an act providing a salary supplement for each judge of the Superior Court of the Belfast.
State and local government.
House Bill 196 by Representative Benton of the 31st, a bill to be titled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 1 of Title 47 of the OCGA relating to general provisions relative to retirement and pensions.
Retirement.
House Bill 218 by Representative Williams of the 145th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Part 7 of Article 7 of Chapter 3 of Title 20.
Higher ed.
House Bill 223 by Representative Dickey of the 140th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Chapter 14 to Title 12 of the OCGA relating to oil or hazardous material spills that are released.
Natural resources.
House Bill 227 by Representative Fry of the 118th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Code Section 3364 of the OCGA relating to enumeration of unfair methods of competition.
Insurance and labor.
House Bill 230 by Representative Holcomb of the 81st, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 14 of the OCGA relating to business corporations so as to provide for benefit corporations to provide for the application.
Judiciary.
House Bill 239 by Representative Stration of the 104th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Title 15 of the OCGA relating to courts so as to establish the Georgia Business Corporation.
Judiciary.
House Bill 253 Representative Hawkins of the 27th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Title 43 of the OCGA relating to professions and businesses so as to update and revise various provisions relating to occupational
Regulated industries.
House Bill 266 by Representative Widower of the 119th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Code Section 48.727 of the OCGA relating to computation of taxable net income so as to revise.
Banking.
House Bill 272 by Representative Holcomb of the 81st, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend an act providing a homestead exemption from City of Chamblee ad valorem taxes for city purposes in the amount of $30,000 of the
State and local government.
House Bill 273 by Representative Holcomb of the 81st, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend an act providing a homestead exemption from City of Chamblee ad valorem taxes for city
State and local government.
House Bill 287 by Representative Dubnik the 29th, and others, a bill to be titled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 7 of Title 48 of the OCGA relating to imposition rate computation exemptions from
Finance.
House Bill 314 by Representative Stevens, the 164th, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Chapter 7, Title 52 of the OCGA, relating to registration, operation, and sale of watercraft.
Finance.
House Bill 324 by Representative Gravely of the 67th, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Chapter 12 of Title 16 of the OCGA, relating to offenses against public health and morals.
Regulated industries.
House Bill 329 by Representative Metz of the 55th, and others, a bill be titled and enacted to authorize the City of South Fulton to exercise all redevelopment and other powers under Article 9, Section 2.
State and local government.
House Bill 342 by Representative Dollar of the 45th, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Title 40 of the OCGA, relating to motor vehicles and traffic, so as to provide for the issuance of a traffic citation to a vehicle owner in lieu of
Public safety.
House Bill 345 by Representative Cooper the 43rd, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Article 1 of Chapter 1 of Title 42 of the OCGA, relating to inmate policies, so as to provide for prohibited practices.
Health and human services.
House Bill 346 by Representative Cooper of the 43rd, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Article 1 of Chapter 7, Title 44 of the OCGA, relating to landlord and tenant generally, so as to prohibit retaliation by
Judiciary.
House Bill 365 by Representative Blackman of the 146th, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Chapter 5C of Title 48 of the OCGA, relating to alternative ad valorem taxes on motor vehicles, so as to lower the tax rate imposed to revise the
Finance.
House Bill 367 by Representative Taylor of the 173rd, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Title 33 of the OCGA, relating to insurance, so as to enact the Corporate Governance Annual Disclosure Act to provide for definitions.
Insurance.
House Bill 368 by Representative Taylor, 173rd, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Title 33 of the OCGA, relating to insurance, so as to provide for the division of a domestic insurer.
Insurance.
House Bill 387 by Representative Lumsden the 12th, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Code Section 4414, 320 of the OCGA, relating to certain liens, establishing removal of non-conforming liens, so as to provide.
Judiciary.
House Bill 406 by Representative Williamson the 115th, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Title 36 and Title 48 of the OCGA, relating to local government and revenue and taxation, respectively.
Finance.
House Bill 445 by Representative Hogan of the 179th, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Part 2 of Article 4 of Chapter 5 of Title 12 of the OCGA, relating to shore protection, so as to revise various provisions relative to shore protection to revise.
Natural resources.
House Bill 446 by Representative Knight of the 130th, and others, a bill be titled and enacted in Code Section 48740.36 of the OCGA, relating to income tax credits for timber producers incurring losses from hurricane.
Finance.
House Bill 455 by Representative Houston, the 170th, and others, a bill titled and enacted in Title 2 of the OCGA, relating to agriculture, so as to create the Georgia Agricultural Marketing Authority to provide for the liberal construction.
Agriculture.
House Bill 456 by Representative Tinkersley of the 160th, and others, a bill titled and enacted in Article 1 of Chapter 81 of Title 36 of the OCGA, relating to local government budgets and audits, so as to increase the
Government oversight.
House Bill 460 by Representative Robichaud of the 48th, and others, a bill titled and enacted to authorize the governing authority of the City of Roswell to levy an excise tax pursuant to subsection.
State and local government.
House Bill 462 by Representative Smith on the 70th, and others, a bill titled and enacted and enact provide a homestead exemption from Coweta County School District ad valorem taxes for educational purposes in the amount of $40,000 for residents of that school district who are 65 years of age but less than 71
State and local government.
House Bill 471 by Representative Saintons of the 180th, and others, a bill titled and enacted Article 3, Chapter 5 of Title 40 of the OCGA, relating to cancellation, suspension, and revocation of licenses as to revise.
Public safety.
House Bill 472 by Representative Reeds of the 34th, and others, a bill titled and enacted Chapter 11, Title 15 of the OCGA, relating to general provisions of the Juvenile Code, so as to revise procedures.
Judiciary.
House Bill 491 by Representative Taylor, the 173rd, and others, a bill titled and enacted Chapter 13 of Title 33 of the OCGA, relating to insurance holding company systems, so as to update.
Insurance.
House Bill 492 by Representative Rich of the 97th, and others, a bill titled and enacted Article 3 of Chapter 7 of Title 44 of the OCGA, relating to possessory proceedings, so as to require applications for execution.
Special judiciary.
House Bill 499 by Representative Kelly the 16th, and others, a bill titled and enacted Article 4, Chapter 3, Title 46 of the OCGA, relating to electric membership corporations and foreign electric cooperatives.
Regulated industries.
House Bill 500 by Representative Chiacos of the 138th, and others, a bill titled and enacted repeal and act creating public body, corporate, and politic, and an instrumentality of the county.
State and local government.
House Bill 501 by Representative Petray, the 166th, and others, bill titled and enacted Article 4, Chapter 4, Title 27 of the OCGA, relating to seafood, so as to provide for mariculture development.
Natural resources.
House Bill 510 by Representative Lauricia of the 169th, and others, a bill titled and act to authorize the City of Douglas to exercise all redevelopment and other powers under Article.
State and local government.
House Bill 529 by Representative Moore of the 95th, and others, a bill titled and act to amend and act provide a new charter for the City of Norcross, approved March 28, 1990.
State and local government.
House Bill 531 by representatives of the 152nd. Bill will be titled an act to repeal an act providing that the tax commissioner of Lee County shall retain a percentage of educational funds collected by said officer and remit the same to the governing authority of Lee County to reimburse the county for the cost of collecting school taxes. Approved May 30, 2003.
State and local government.
House Resolution 346 by Representatives of the 160th and others. A resolution honoring the lives of Caitlin Baggett, Maureen Bass, Emily Clark, Abby Deloach, and Catherine McKay Pittman, and dedicating a bridge in their memory for other purposes.
Transportation.
Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Secretary will now read reports of standing committees, please.
Mr. President, Senate Committee on Ethics has had a consideration of following legislation instructing report same back to the Senate for recommendation. House Bill 316 do pass by substitutes. Submitted by Senator Kirkpatrick of the 32nd. Mr. Secretary, pursuant to Senate Rule 2-1.6, I hereby give notice that I will introduce a minority report to be read along with the majority report of House Bill 316, submitted by Senator Hinson of the 41st. And Mr. President, Senate Committee on State and Local Government Operations has hired a consideration of following legislation to same back to the Senate for recommendation. House Bill 95 do pass by substitute. House Bill 161 do pass by Senator Kirk of the 13th. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Secretary will now read bills and resolutions for the second time.
House Resolution 51 by Representative Morris the 26th and others. Joint Georgia, North Carolina, and Georgia-Tennessee Boundary Line Commission create. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
It is now time for our morning roll call. Are there any motions to excuse? Chair recognizes the senator from the 7th.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 8th for business inside the Capitol.
Without objection, the senator from the 8th is excused. The chair recognizes the senator from the 11th.
Mr. President, I request unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 9th.
Without objection, the senator from the 9th is excused. Are there any other motions to excuse? Senator will call the roll. The secretary will call the roll. The senator signify your presence by voting the yea switch. The secretary will unlock the machine. It is now time for our morning devotional. All senators, please take your seats and cease all audible conversations. Doorkeepers, please secure the doors. I'd like to recognize the senator from the 35th to lead us in our pledge today and to introduce us to the chaplain of the day.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. President. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now let us salute the Georgia flag. I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag. This is an exciting day for me. This is the day that the Lord hath made. We shall rejoice and be glad in it. We have one of Georgia's greatest ministers with us today, and it's a special place in my heart because he is the minister of a church that I had to go in and out of. I say I'm a member, but I was actually a member of the church that's right across from them, Our Lady of Lourdes. And every Sunday, my 5 sisters and I would have to leave Mass and walk down to meet my great-grandmother at Big Bethel AME. But we couldn't pass that church that was right across the street without going in for Sunday school. You see, their Sunday school always had punch and cookies and all kind of goodies. So right now today, people think that I grew up in Ebenezer Baptist Church. And so that makes me a sanctified Catholic, right? But for many years, my uncle, Leroy Johnson, who was a senator here many years ago, he's been a deacon there, and my whole family has continued to claim Ebenezer as our church. About 20 years ago, my friend Brenda Sanford, that's the chairperson and executive director of the Intergenerational Resource Center, which is an adult daycare center. She has worked with Ebenezer Baptist Church. In the old church, she had the whole basement where seniors could come and those who were disabled. And I had a chance to read to them. Reverend Warnock, you just didn't even know that I was right there right before you came. But since 2005, the Reverend Dr. Raphael G. Warnock has served as the senior pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, spiritual home of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., the son of 2 Pentecostal pastors. Dr. Warnock responded to the call of ministry at a very early age, and at age 35 became the 35th and the youngest person ever called to the senior pastorate of Ebenezer Baptist Church, founded in 1886. Before coming to EBC, America's Freedom Church, Dr. Warnock was blessed to study and serve within the pastoral ranks of the leading congregations, also known for their deep spiritual roots and strong public witness. Under Dr. Warnock's leadership, more than 4,000 new members have joined Ebenezer Baptist Church, enhancing the church's legacy of social activism with both spiritual and numerical growth. Dr. Warnock is a graduate of the leadership program sponsored by the Greater Baltimore Committee, a graduate of the Summer Leadership Institute of Harvard University, and a graduate of Leadership Atlanta. Dr. Warnock graduated from Morehouse College, cum laude, in 1991, receiving a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology. He also holds a Master of Divinity degree from Union Theological Seminary in New York City, from which he graduated with honors and distinctions. Seeing his pastoral work as tied to the ministry of scholarship and the life of the mind, Dr. Warnock has continued his graduate studies at Union, receiving a master's degree and a doctorate of philosophy degree in the field of systematic theological. And he is a member of Alpha Psi Alpha fraternity, the 100 Black Men of Atlanta, and lifetime member of the NAACP. Dr. Warnock's activism was honored in 2016 as his footprints were placed in the International Civil Rights Walk of Fame. And the list goes on and on of all of the great things that he's associated with and he has done. And I know that a few of our members here in the Senate actually attends his church on a regular basis. So without further ado, I am honored and privileged to give to introduce to some and present to others one who was not just called but chosen by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and that is the Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock. Thank you. Please come.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so very much, Senator Donzella James, for your very kind and generous introduction. I am grateful to be here on Crossover Day at the Senate of the greatest state in the Union, the state of Georgia. I'm always glad to be invited to this place. I was told to come and offer a devotional. Someone sent me a letter, said 5 minutes. Somebody else said 15 minutes. But they invited a Baptist preacher. It takes a Baptist preacher 5 minutes to clear his throat, 15 minutes to get warmed up. But we will do our very best. To the Lieutenant Governor, Jeff Duncan, and of course, Governor Kemp in his absence, to all of you who serve and are engaged in a very noble profession of public work and public service. We're grateful for all that you do. And we pray for you not just this day, but we pray for you daily. And we pray for the great state of Georgia, that it will live up to its highest ideals. And we pray for the United States of America, and indeed, we pray for the world, because God has a great vision for the world. God is known by many names, worshiped in many houses. I come out of the Christian tradition, but we know that God is the God of the universe, creator of us all. And in that Judeo-Christian tradition, there is a text that I want to raise in your hearing. The Lieutenant Governor asked me as I was coming up what was I going to preach about. I didn't know I was supposed to do a sermon, but he gave me permission. But Isaiah says in the 40th chapter of Isaiah, he lifts up a grand vision, and I know that you all are engaged in the rough and tumble of politics. And it might be helpful to us in a moment like this to capture the prophet's vision, who pulls us beyond the battles of the day and offers to us a broad and lofty vision of God's dream for humanity. Isaiah speaks about the voice of one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill brought low. The crooked places shall be made straight, and the rough places smooth. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." What a grand and lofty vision that Isaiah lays out for us. It is picked up by every writer of the Gospels in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all of them pick up some piece of this vision because it is so grand and lofty. It captures our moral imagination, this idea that every valley shall be exalted, every mountain and hill made low, the rough places shall be made smooth, and the crooked places shall be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. You are engaged in the work of politics, how we will govern the land. The prophet offers to us a moral topography, a vision of the land. And the first thing he says that in God's vision for humanity, every valley is exalted and every mountain is made low. Imagine that. If valleys are exalted and mountains and hills are made low, there is a leveling of the playing field so that all of us can see eye to eye, that we stand together at the end of the day on the same plane. In God's vision for humanity, in God's economy, low places are made high and high places are made low. In other words, people of privilege and power have to give up something, have to come down a little lower so that folk who are low can come up a little higher and there can be equality in the land. And so my prayer is that we will live up to that ideal, that we will do all that we can so that our children will not have their destiny determined by their zip code. That no matter where they're born, that they know that they can be lifted up high. And that is a poignant call even in the place where we sit, because while Atlanta is the cradle of the civil rights movement, we know that we have the dubious distinction, even as we sit here, of knowing that this is one of the worst places for income and wealth inequality in the world. This metropolitan region, over the last several years, we've been either number one or number two in income inequality. And so as you do your work, I hope that you will hear Isaiah speaking to you and saying that every valley needs to be exalted. Hills and mountains made low. A child's future should not be determined by their zip code. There ought to be equality in the world. And when you are accustomed to privilege, I submit to you that when you are accustomed to privilege, whether it is male privilege or racial privilege or any kind of privilege, when you are accustomed to privilege, parity might feel like oppression because it turns things upside down. It makes us uncomfortable, but it is in that discomfort that God's vision of the world can come to reality. And so Isaiah lifts up this vision of equality. But not only that, he goes on to say that crooked places are made straight. Crooked places are made straight. We need equality in the land, but we also need integrity. Above all, we need our public servants to act with integrity, to speak the truth, to stand by the truth, to do the right thing even when it costs you. Crooked places shall be made straight. And we have to be honest that there are a lot of crooked places in this land that we love. This beautiful land, this beloved land, has some crooked places that need to be made straight. We need to know that when our elected officials speak, that we can trust what they're saying, that they're telling the truth. We need crooked places to be made straight. In the United States of America, the truth is, too often we have two criminal justice systems. One if you're rich and one if you're poor. One if you're white, one if you are a person of color. In America, you are better off to be rich and guilty, says Brian Stevenson, than poor and innocent. So we need crooked places to be made straight. And people should not be locked up simply because they do not have the money to pay cash bail. Last June, our church took the little resources that we have, and we spent Father's Day weekend bailing poor people out of jail. And while we were grateful to help the few, our larger message was that in our system, people should not be locked up simply because they can't afford to pay. And rich people should not be able to get out if they're dangerous simply because they can't afford to pay. Crooked places shall be made straight. So no more inequality. No more criminal justice system based on the depth of your pockets. No more voter suppression and voter intimidation. No more playing games with the ballot. In America, we have arguments about bread and butter and guns. We have arguments about how to spend public resources, but after the arguments are made, and they're often tough arguments, complicated arguments, at the end of the day, the people ought to be able to go to the polls and cast their vote. And they ought to be able to do it, and it ought not be so difficult. and they ought to be able to trust that their vote will count. They ought not show up at polls and discover that they are no longer qualified to vote. Above all, we have to protect the integrity of our democracy. That is not just a political call, it's a moral call. Isaiah says that in God's vision, crooked places are made straight. Think about this. Eric Garner, a few years ago, in the state of New York, had his life literally choked out of him for selling some loose cigarettes. Meanwhile, Wall Street bankers almost sent the whole economy over the cliff, destroyed billions of dollars of household wealth through mortgage fraud, and no Wall Street banker went to jail. Crooked places need to be made straight. But then Isaiah encourages us, and he says that in God's vision, not only will valleys be exalted and mountains made low and crooked places made straight, he said rough places are made smooth. So there's equality, there's integrity, and the good news is that there's possibility. I still believe in America. I still believe in the great state of Georgia. Someone mentioned Ray Charles earlier in the session, who was met with the ugliness of Jim Crow segregation. Ray Charles did not have sight, but he had vision. And he inspired us with his words and with his song and with his poetry. And that's the beauty of America, and that's the possibility even of politics, as messy as it can be, that we ought to do all we can to draw out human possibility. I came from a people who know how to do that. They gave us scraps and we made soul food. They gave us the blues and we made music. They gave us the Bible and pointed to Ephesians, used the holy book and read just one verse, slaves obey your masters. My ancestors could barely read, and yet they took the Bible and said there's a book in here called Exodus where God told Moses to tell Pharaoh to let my people go. They took a religion intended to make them docile and obedient and developed the independent black church movement, and out of that movement came Ebenezer, and out of Ebenezer came Martin Luther King Jr., who taught all of us how to make the rough places smooth. And that's the work that we're called to do, to pull out the human possibility in every child. And then finally, in God's vision, not only is there equality, not only is there integrity, not only is there human possibility, no matter where you were born and the color of your skin or your gender or your orientation, there's inclusivity. Isaiah said that the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. God is talking to all of us. God is trying to give us a glimpse of God's vision of hope and human possibility. But here's the thing. It's in the text. The only way to see it is for us to get together. Politics is what it is, but there's some things that don't have to do with right and left. They have to do with right and wrong. They have to do with what's the right thing to do. And the way to see what God is up to in the world really is to get together. There's some things you can't see because really of where you're situated in the world. I think I'm a pretty progressive guy with not a bone of chauvinism in my body until I start talking to my wife. Because she sees some stuff as a woman, do you understand, that I cannot see? Some things that people of color can see that those who've been born in a different place can't see. There are things that poor people can see that those of us who have relative privilege can't see. And so in order to govern well, we have to talk to one another. All flesh shall see it together. When we get together, we can see what God is up to in the world. Thank you so very much for the work that you do. Sincerely and truly, I pray for you that you will live up to our highest ideals. Will you stand with me? And will you join hands even across the aisle? all the way across the aisle. Somebody's got to come this way and somebody's got to come that way. Imagine that. You want to see the glory of the Lord, all flesh has to get together. Let us pray. And I saw a great hill, and on that hill stood men and women, boys and girls. They hailed from the four corners of the earth. They were diverse and variegated in their humanity. And yet they stood shoulder to shoulder. On a level playing field, they looked into each other's eyes and they were not afraid. They were not afraid. They chose hope for each other over fear of one another. They were not afraid. And so I said to the angel standing there, "What is this?" And the answer came that this is the kingdom of God imbued with love and justice. Love and justice. Justice is what love looks like in public. And so I asked the one standing there, "What is this?" He said, "It is the kingdom of God imbued with love and justice." And so I asked, "Where is this?" And the answer came, "It exists already in the hearts of those who have the courage to believe and struggle." And so I asked, "When is this?" And the answer came, "When we learn the simple art of loving one another as sisters and brothers." And so, gracious God, give us strength, give us courage, make us worthy of being the descendants of great ancestors on whose shoulders we stand. We remember Leroy Johnson, who's now in his 90s, a member of Ebenezer Church who broke through the barriers in this very chamber. We stand on his shoulders, Julian Bond, so many others who pressed their way and kept the faith. May we be found worthy of the vocation to which we are called, and may we trust in you, the God who does all things well. We pray for our children, and we pray not only with our lips, with our legislation, with our laws. We pray for every child. Help us to be steadfast, honest, and true to the vision, the great vision, God's moral topography, God's dream for the world. Help us to be true to the vision. We lay this prayer now at the feet of the God who loves us into freedom and frees us into loving. Amen.
If I could have your attention. Because of the length of the day, we've invited 2 doctors of the day to join us today. I'd like to start by introducing the first doctor of the day and introduce the senator from the 42nd, recognize the senator from the 42nd to introduce our first doctor of the day.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I'm honored to introduce the doctor of the day, who is a repeat doctor, so apparently we treated her well enough the last time she was here, and I'm grateful that she's chosen to come back and aid us once again. This is Dr. Carmen Sultan. She's a native of Decatur, Georgia. She went to Chamblee Charter High School and completed her medical training at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, and then her pediatrics and emergency medicine fellowship training at Emory. She works as a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta at the Eggleston and Hughes Spalding campuses. She enjoys caring for trauma patients and mentoring and educating residents and other fellows. Colleagues, please join me in welcoming and thanking Dr. Carmen Sultan.
Great. Good morning. I'm Carmen Sultan. I'm one of the ER attendings at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I spend most of my time at Eggleston and some time at Hughes Spalding downtown at Grady. I think this is the 3rd or 4th time that I've been the doctor of the day, so I'm very pleased to be here with you. I appreciate all the work that you do for all of Georgia's children, especially the children that I see at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, many of which are poorly insured or underinsured. So I encourage you to keep fighting for Georgia's children. I see a lot of trauma patients and motor vehicle crashes. So I appreciate all of the work that you do. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I've seen more children down in the medical clinic today than I think I've seen in all of my 3 years. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Let's go over here and take some pictures. And for our second doctor of the day, I'd like to recognize the senator from the 52nd.
Yeah, just right here is good. Thank you, Mr. President. I want to introduce to y'all Dr. Brad Bushnell. He's originally from Athens, Georgia. It doesn't say on here, but I know he was the valedictorian at Clark Central back in the day, and he received his undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt in 1999 and his doctorate from the Medical College of Georgia. And he did his residency in orthopedic surgery at UNC Chapel Hill. He also has an MBA in business from Auburn. He's currently the chair of the Department of Orthopedics and Sports Medicine at the Harbin Clinic in Rome, Georgia, and serves as the lead team physician for the Rome Braves. Dr. Bushnell is an assistant clinical professor of orthopedics at MCG, on the board of directors for the Boys and Girls Club of Northwest Georgia and the board of trustees for Berry College. He's also a reserve sheriff deputy and the SWAT medical officer for Rome and Floyd County. He and his wife, Kimberly, have 2 children, Sarah Beth and then Bo, that's right over here with us today. I can also tell you that he's fluent in Spanish, which I found out is very helpful in the operating room, though I do sometimes wonder what he's saying about me from the look on their faces when he's talking to them. And I got to tell you one quick story here. We were in the operating room together last year. He scrubbed in, the phone rings, and the circulation nurse says, there's this guy on the phone that claims he's Brian Kemp and wants to talk to you. And he said, Brian Kemp, he's not calling me, and besides, I'm scrubbed in. So she talked to him, and he said, well, can I at least call back and leave a voicemail? Well, this time I answered the phone, and I said, why are you calling my doctors in my area? I intercept these calls, and I need to know what your business is. And, of course, he could not figure out how in the world I got that phone call, but we had a great laugh about it later on. But anyway, I introduced you a church member that I'm with here, Dr. Brad Bushnell.
Thanks, Chuck. And as many of y'all may know, they're filming the new Will Smith Bad Boys sequel right outside of Chuck's window right now. So if he looks a little baggy-eyed, it's because he had bombs going off outside all night long. Anyway, I'm working the night shift tonight with it being crossover day, so thanks to each and every one of you for spending not just this long day, but these long weeks down here in service of our great state. And hopefully none of you need my services tonight, but if you do, I'll be around. Y'all have a great day.
Are there any unanimous consents? Does any senator wish to rise on a point of personal privilege today? Chair recognizes the senator from the 25th.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted the Senate to welcome our Jackson High School juniors that are in the gallery today. They are AP classes. There's about 14 or 15 of them here today, and they are very, I actually had an 11th grader ask me about the teacher retirement system. So they're very informed, very well-educated group of young people, and I just wanted to welcome them here today. Thank you, Mr. President.
You have a consent calendar of privileged resolutions before you. Does any senator wish to remove a resolution from the consent calendar? Is there objection to the adoption of the resolution on the consent calendar? The chair hears none, and the resolutions on the consent calendar are adopted. The secretary will read a resolution.
Senate Resolution 298 by Senator Heath of the 31st and others, a resolution urging the House and Senate to recognize Saturday, September 28th, 2019 as National Hunting and Fishing Day in the state of Georgia and for other purposes. That concludes the order.
Is there objection to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none, and the resolution is adopted. Are there any motions to withdraw and commit? You have a consent calendar of local bills before you. Mr. Secretary, are there any objections filed to the bills on the local consent calendar?
Mr. President, there are no objections filed.
Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the Committee on State and Local Government Operations, which is favorable to the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is agreed to. The question is on the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar. All those in favor will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bills, the yeas are 55, the nays are 0. The bills on the local consent calendar, having received the requisite constitutional majority, are therefore passed. For what purpose does the majority leader rise?
Mr. President, I ask for unanimous consent that Senate Bills 216, Senate Bill 213, and Senate Bill 138 be engrossed.
Is there objection? There is objection. Would you like to speak to the motion? Would the objection like to speak to the objection? He waives. All right, the majority leader has moved for unanimous consent that Senate Bills 216, 213, and 138 be engrossed. All those in favor of the motion will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. On the motion, the yeas are 35, the nays are 19. The motion has prevailed, and Senate Bills 216, 213, and 138 are engrossed. We're now moving on to the rules calendar. Mr. Secretary, will you read the caption to Senate Bill 173? No, Senate Bill 211.
Senate Bill 211 by Senator Harper the 7th and others, a bill to be titled Enact Amendment Article 4 of Chapter 2 of Title 26 of the OCJ, relating to advertisement and sale of meat generally, so as to render unlawful the representation of non-animal products and non-slaughtered animal flesh as meat and for other purposes. Amendment 1 by Senator Harper the 7th offers the following amendment: amend Senate Bill 211 by replacing a definition with 4 definitions on line 4 by replacing lines 29 through 38 with the following. C1, as used in this subsection, the term animal means any animal, including cattle, swine, sheep, goats, fish, and poultry, including eggs raised for the production of an edible product or products intended for human consumption and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
For what purpose does the senator from the 53rd wish to be recognized? At the appropriate time, we'll recognize you to ask a question. This time, I'd like to recognize the senator from the 7th to speak to Senate Bill 211.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, Senate Bill 211 attempts to make sure we address truth in labeling issues, and that folks that go to the grocery store to buy their food knows where their food comes from. And this is obviously a pro-ag industry bill, and a bill that supports our men and women who are farmers and ranchers, not only in our state but across the country. And basically, as the underlying premise is if it's not meat that comes from a livestock or food produced for the production of food, then you can't call it meat. The amendment, I'll speak to it very briefly. In the Ag Committee, we had some discussions to make sure that we're including items that are including livestock, all livestock that are typically used, and so we added a definition of animal. That's primarily the purpose of the amendment. Most of the language in the amendment is the same as the underlying bill. If there are no questions, Mr. President, I will yield the will.
You have several questions. Do you yield?
I yield.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 53rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
I yield to the esteemed Rules Chairman.
Yes, isn't it true that we should all move on this issue? Because it's important to our industry.
I would agree with the gentleman from the 53rd.
Chair recognizes the minority leader for a question.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Will
Mr.
you
Leader?
yield?
I'll yield to the leader.
Thank you. Is presently lab-grown meat, or if that's the proper way to phrase it, is it available for commercial sales?
To my knowledge, I don't believe that it is currently available for commercial sale, but it is in the production stage of being processed for commercial sale.
And just out of curiosity, Senator, if you'll further yield?
I'll yield.
Do you know if the meat produced is the same as that is with an animal that is grown? I mean, is it as safe as it is, the same nutrient value? Do you know the health effects of that type of meat?
I've not seen a scientific study of a side-by-side comparison to the leader, but I will argue this point, that it is not the same because it is not a product that is produced from livestock that is grown by farmers and ranchers across our state and across the country that produce the food and fiber for America's citizens, and because of that, we believe that it's a truth in labeling. When you go to the grocery store and you see that it's beef, you expect that beef came from cattle produced on a cattle farm and not grown in a lab.
Senator, further yield?
I yield.
Is it not true that, of course, cattle and other livestock create, carbon gases, that they do have environmental impact, and that there's also ethical issues that arise in the treatment of livestock, that we should at least in the future keep an open mind to whether or not, it's ethical in the future? I certainly don't know enough now to say that you're not absolutely correct, but is it not true that we should keep an open mind, look at things as they develop, and also the economic impacts of this as it develops in the future?
I believe the minority leader has his opinion in regard to that issue, and I respect your opinion. My opinion may differ in some of those points that you made.
Do you continue to yield?
I'll yield. If there
Chair
are more
recognizes
questions.
the senator from the 9th.
Will the senator yield?
I'll yield to the Education Committee Chairman.
Senator, how bad do you want this bill?
Our farmers and producers and ag industry across this state would appreciate your support of this legislation, because it is a good measure to support our state's #1 industry.
I'm assuming the senator from the 29th had the same question, because he had his button pushed until you said that. Chair recognizes the senator from the 56th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I'll yield.
Senator, we've been discussing your bill, and right here, right now, can you tell me, where's the beef?
Do you continue to yield?
I think it's time to yield the well. This is not my first bill, Mr. President. I'll yield the well, Mr. President. I appreciate all of your support. Thank you very much.
Senator from the 7th has yielded the well. Would any other senators wish to speak to the measure or the amendment? All right. The question is now on the adoption of amendment number 1. Is there objection to adoption of the amendment? Hearing none, the floor amendment is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is now agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass as amended? The question is on the passage of the bill as amended. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. For what purpose does the senator from the 18th rise?
Parliamentary
State your
inquiry, Mr.
inquiry.
President. The question is, does the author of this bill want us to vote yea or nay?
I would urge you to get to the senator's desk. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 48, the nays are 7. This bill having received the requisite constitutional majority is therefore passed as amended. Mr. Secretary, can you read the caption to Senate Bill 216?
Senate Bill 216 by Senator Moles the 53rd, a bill will be titled Enactment, Chapter 5 of Title 48 of the OCGA, relating to ad valorem taxation of property so as to allow local governments to accept prepayments of ad valorem taxes and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 53rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this may be a surprise to you, but this is not a funny bill. This is a serious bill, but it's a good bill. And this simply allows your local government to set up a payment plan for those who may want to pay their taxes early. Can you believe that? But it simply allows them. It's a may, not a shall. And I'd be glad to answer any questions if the members have one.
You
Mr.
have no
President.
questions.
All right, please vote for this. Have a good day.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? The chair hears none, and the previous question is now ordered. Is there objection or agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is now agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass? The question is on the passage of the bill. All those in favor will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 54, the nays are 0. This bill having received the requisite constitutional majority is therefore passed. Mr. Secretary, will you read the caption as Senate Bill 200?
Senate Bill 200 by Senator Gooch of the 51st and others. A bill will be titled Enact Amendment Article 4 of Chapter 2 of Title 32 of the OCGA, relating to exercise of power to contract by the Georgia Department of Transportation so as to require the department to develop a procedure for appealing the rejection of a contract bid and for other purposes. Mr. President. Senate Committee on Transportation offers following substitute to Senate Bill 200. Bill will be titled Enact Amendment Article 4 of Chapter 2 of Title 32 of the OCGA relating to exercise of power to contract by the Georgia Department of Transportation so as to require the department to develop a procedure for appealing the rejection of contract bid and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 51st to speak to Senate Bill 200.
Thank you, Mr. President. The reader did such a good job, he's already read the entire bill. This is a short one. Sets up a procedure for anyone to appeal a bid that's been rejected at the Department of Transportation. Mr. President, I'll yield for questions.
You have no questions.
Thank you.
Any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? The question is now on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is now agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass by substitute? The question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 54, the nays are 0. This bill having received the requisite constitutional majority is therefore passed by substitute. Mr. Secretary, please read the caption as Senate Resolution 275.
Senate Resolution 275 by Senator Unterman of the 45th and others, a resolution creating the Joint Innovation and Emerging Technologies Study Committee and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 45th to speak to Senate Resolution 275.
Good morning, members of the Senate. I bring before you Senate Resolution 275, and it's my honor to work with the Lieutenant Governor, and one of his main platforms is technology. This committee sets forth a joint study committee looking at that technology. As you know, health IT in the state of Georgia is known all over the world for our innovation and the number of companies that we have here located in Georgia. Over 250 companies are related to health IT. I ask for your favorable consideration. I'll yield the well if there's not any questions.
You have no, you have a question. Chair, he waves. You have no question, Senator.
Thank you. I ask for your favorable consideration.
For what purpose does the senator from the 15th rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the second.
Without objection, the senator from the second is excused. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the resolution? The chair hears none, and the previous question is ordered. Is there objection or agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this resolution now be adopted? The question is on the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor of the resolution will vote yea. Opposed, nay. Secretary will unlock the machine. On the adoption of the resolution, the yeas are 51, the nays are 1. This resolution, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore adopted. Mr. Secretary, will you read the caption to Senate Bill 225?
Senate Bill 225 by Senator Walker, the 20th, and others, a bill to be titled Enact to amend Article 1 of Chapter 11 of Title 15 of the OCGA relating to general provisions regarding the Juvenile Code so as to bring such provisions in conformity with the Federal Social Security Act and the Family First Prevention Services Act to amend Articles 3 and 4 of Chapter 11 of Title 15 of the OCGA relating to dependency proceedings and termination of parental rights to amend Article 1 of Chapter 5 of Title 49 of the OCGA relating to children and youth services to amend Article 2 of Chapter 13 of Title 50 of the OCGA relating to the Office of State Administrative Hearings and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 20th to speak to Senate Bill 225.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. This is a bill I bring to you for the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services with the approval of the governor. It's essentially a housekeeping bill that is needed to bring Georgia law up to date and to conform with the Family First Prevention Services Act that was passed by Congress in 2018. It incentivizes early intervention with families to try to keep children out of foster care. It also sets up a qualified residential treatment program for children with severe problems. It deals with the Social Security Act and the Indian Tribe Rights Act. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Otherwise, I ask for your favorable consideration, and I will yield the well.
You have no questions, Senator.
Thank you.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? The chair hears none, and the previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass? The question is on the passage of the bill. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 51, the nays are 0. This bill having received the requisite constitutional majority is therefore passed. Mr. Secretary, will you read the caption to Senate Bill 131?
Senate Bill 131 by Senator Jones of the 25th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 6 of the OCGA relating to aviation so as to create the Georgia Major Airport Authority to amend Article 1 of Chapter 15 of Title 45 of the OCGA to general provisions relative to the Attorney General so as to provide for representation of the Georgia Major Airport Authority by the Attorney General and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Transportation offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 131, a bill be titled an act to amend Title VI of the OCGA relating to aviation so as to create the Georgia Major Airport Authority, to provide for a short title, to provide for legislative findings and declarations, to provide for definitions, to provide for appointment of members, terms, and filling of vacancies, to provide for officers' quorum, reimbursement for expenses and compensation of employees, to provide for members accountable as trustees, conflicts of interest in books and records, to provide for general powers, to provide for requirements for the issuance of revenue bonds or other obligations, to provide for tax exemption, to amend Article 1 of Chapter 15 of Title 45 of the OCGA relating to general provisions relative to the Attorney General so as to provide for representation of the Georgia Major Airport Authority and for other purposes. Amendment 1 by Senator.
There are several amendments being offered that are in the process of being copied and will be distributed throughout the presentation. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 25th to speak to Senate Bill 131.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today, colleagues, to bring a bill that I think many of you are very familiar with. It's been talked about this session. Actually, it's been talked about a good bit the last year. And it's Senate Bill 131 pertaining to the Airport Authority bill. I had someone ask me, what has been your interest in this particular legislation? What has driven you to be so enthused and so passionate about it? And I can't point to anything that is better served than what was listed in this morning's paper as once again, another indictment, charge of corruption that has taken place at an airport that we hold so near and dear to our heart as being an economic engine for the entire state. And I can tell you, in my 39 years of living, I've always seen these types of articles float through the HAC and other syndicated columns, and it always has brought me to the conclusion that someone should look into those instances that have been going on there, causing so much, I guess, really embarrassment to the state of Georgia as a whole when you look at the full picture. But I'm a very reasonable person, and I know that sometimes perception can be stronger than reality. And last year I introduced legislation, but quickly saw that 40 days was not going to be enough time to dissect such a complicated issue. So I changed it to a study committee. And on that study committee, I asked that we comprise it with both Republican and Democrats from all across the state, because I wanted seasoned veteran legislators from this body to properly vet what we were going to have come before us with the study committee, because I wanted the facts of this issue to ring true in whatever conclusion that we wanted to do. I didn't want partisan politics. I didn't want some sort of rural metro divide argument or anything like that. I wanted the facts to make our conclusion what we had, and so we did. We had 8 Republicans and 5 Democrats that served on our committee. We had legislators from Albany to Blue Ridge and all areas throughout the state on that committee, and we took on issues that were brought up to us as problems that we might have if we tried to put forth legislation. So we talked about bond issues, and we talked about the lease agreements, and we talked about vendors and the procurement process and what the procedures were, and all the other interactions that the city of Atlanta is in charge of when it pertains to Hartsfield International Airport. Now, like some of you in here, I'm a business person, and when you have an issue with anything, number one, you need to find out what the root of the issue is, and then number two, ask enough questions about how we fix it, and finally the answer will come to you. Well, fortunately, on our first committee, first study committee that we had back in the summer, back in August, we had a gentleman that came to testify in front of us who was a former City of Atlanta financial officer, and he worked for Maynard Jackson. He thought very well of Maynard Jackson, but after his conclusion of his employment with the city, he went on to get his PhD from the University of Georgia, and he wrote a dissertation on basically the flaws of the city government structure when it pertains to Atlanta Airport. And this dissertation, almost 40 years ago, he almost prophesied exactly what issues that the city-run entity controlled by one elected official within a city government would bring to the airport long term. And in 1980, he talked about how unless you have some real stringent procedures in place, actually he promoted an authority an arm's length away from the political process and that could operate independent of a city government or even a state government, much like what our ports and our authorities do. But in that dissertation that he had 40 years ago, he said you will continue to have, if you don't change the structure of this facility, that you will continue to have indictments, you will continue to have investigations, you will continue to have political gamesmanships that were going on then and have continued on through the decades. Now I say all this because that, even though that was a piece of writing that he did 40 years ago, it rings true today, and it gets to the root of the issue that I think that we as a body and as a legislature need to address. And that's what the Senate Bill 131 is all about. Now, it is a state authority. It could have very easily been a city-state authority. I have, and the committee members on the study committee, we were inclusive almost to a fault. We allowed the city to have a voice. We allowed their attorneys to have a voice. We allowed their GMs. We allowed their procurement officers. We met with city officials. We met with council folks, both past and present. And the single issue that always came up was that when they weren't interested in trying to negotiate any kind of compromise, but almost to the person, whether they were for this or not for it, they admitted they had some issues that needed to be addressed. And while you hate to be in this posture because you do like having a great relationship with your cities and counties all over the state, but at some point in time you have to have tough conversations, and you have to have tough conversations to address issues that are really a blight on your state as a whole, and having the entity like Atlanta's Hartsfield always being in the news for things like this. And if you see on your desk, you have since 1990, this is a stack of articles that are written by, most of them are from our right-leaning friends at the AJC, and they are, and this is from 1990 to current day. And I never will forget, in the last committee hearing that we had in transportation, the city attorney for Atlanta said in a committee meeting, he said, "We have not had any issues in the last 25 years pertaining to the airport, while there's a current investigation going on," which I found this absolutely kind of appalling. Really almost fell out of my chair when I heard him say that. But what this will do, the Senate Bill 131 is very simple, and it's structured. It's a model that's structured much like our ports and much like our World Congress Center authorities, who are two independent authorities that operate as like a business enterprise, and they do a good job for the state. They're made up of business leaders from all over all over the state, with varying backgrounds, and they have an administrative director that handles the day-to-day operations and the personnel. And that's what I think an entity like the airport should be modeled after. Also, when you're looking at long-term, an aviation structure for the aviation structure and also an aviation arm for this whole state of Georgia, our state's going to continue to grow. And at some point in time, we need an entity that will be willing to look at other venues for a second hub. And because while there's plenty of successes that can be talked about under the current city model, there's plenty of flaws as well when it comes to procurement and vendor selection process. So, Mr. President, if you don't mind, I will. Like I said, it's a structure that is modeled after our ports. It's modeled after our World Congress. The governor will have majority of selections. The lieutenant governor will have 2 picks, and the the speaker's office will have 2 picks as well. And but I'm happy to discuss and happy to take questions. I'm sure there's going to be a few, and I yield for questions.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 10th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator yield?
I do.
Senator, I want to refer back to the beginning of your bill on line 21. It says the General Assembly finds. Do you see that, Senator?
Yes, sir.
Can you share your findings with us? And specifically, what data analysis have you performed? What feasibility studies? What impact studies? Do you have those findings to share with us?
Well, when you talk about putting the public welfare in jeopardy, it does go back to the vendors who are selected. Because if you're putting vendors in there just for as political favors to handle business at the airport, then and there could be more qualified vendors to perform the services that they're asked to do, it does become a public safety issue. When you're talking about fast food restaurants, when you're talking about janitorial services, when you're talking about aviational fuel, all those things, if it's not based on the merit of a person's, if it's not based on the merits of a person's ability to perform their services, then it does become a public safety issue.
Senator Yale?
I do.
Senator, let me restate my question. Perhaps you didn't understand what I was asking. I'm not talking about public welfare or some of those other concerns. My concern is what statistical data do you have that speaks to the findings of this General Assembly as it relates to the impact of your legislation, as it relates to the feasibility of your legislation, as it relates to any other statistical information or even the impact on the state of Georgia's bond rating? What data do you have? Because you mentioned in here that you have findings, so I'm trying to get that information. What information do you have?
Well, we have the revenue bonds, that a lot of people try to talk about as an issue of being able to be transferred. But the fact of the matter is, in our study committee, we had specialists, bond attorneys, who came and to speak to us on those revenue bonds. And the revenue bonds, as you well know, Senator, being a skilled business person yourself, you know that the revenue bonds are not general obligation bonds. The taxpayers of Atlanta are not obligated to those bonds. Those revenue bonds are underwritten by the entity in and of itself, the airport, and its ability to produce the necessary revenues to justify the bonds. So with that, the question becomes, are they transferable bonds? And according to the many legal experts that I've talked to, and it's a small fraternity of aviation bond people out there, if you can imagine. But the ones that I've spoken to, if you can make your case to the FAA that a transfer needs to be made, then those bonds are transferable.
Senator, further yield?
One more question, Senator. I know there's plenty.
Senator, I know you mentioned from the very beginning that the reason why you were doing this was because of data that you received and reports in the AJC regarding corruption. malfeasance, perhaps hush money payments? Are we talking about the federal government, or are we talking about the airport?
We're talking about the issues that brought us here, and it is a long list of indictments and embezzlement scandals and political gamesmanship. That's what's going on. And if this was going on at your business, which I know you have a very successful business, you wouldn't be in business very long because you couldn't afford to do it. Because it is simply, if you know, when you have a business, and there's always going to be mischief with people who are employed. You know that, and I know that. But if you don't get to the root of the problem, at some point in time, it will grow, and it will end up destroying your network.
One final question, Senator?
No, sir. I'm
That's
going to
okay?
move to the next person.
Thank you, Senator.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 28th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, do you yield?
Yes, I do.
Senator, I know you put together this study committee last year. What was the political makeup of that study committee?
It was 8 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And at the conclusion of the study committee, you welcome to read that study committee on your own time, but at the conclusion of that study committee, and paraphrasing, the question was, have we gathered enough evidence to pursue legislation in this body to change the structure of management? And with a unanimous vote, we had 12 members there. It was a 12-0 vote. There was one member that was missing. A unanimous vote. They voted to proceed to legislation.
Thank you, Senator. You further yield?
Yes.
And Senator, I know we tackle issues up here that we may not necessarily be experts in, but based on your study committee and what you learned, how would you explain having the ability to take over this airport? What experience do you bring for that?
Well, that's a great question, Senator. You know, I've got experience in a lot of different venues, and I'll be the first one to tell you when I don't have experience. But one thing's for certain, that I don't have to be a horticulturist to bite into an apple to know if it's rotten or not, you know. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
Yes.
Senator, you indicated that you were almost inclusive to a fault in terms of your study committee. But isn't it correct that there wasn't a single legislator from the city of Atlanta that was included on that committee?
Mm-hmm. That is correct. The president of the Senate picked the committee, and the president of the Senate, which obviously is no longer here, he picked the committee, and his staff picked the committee. I just told him I wanted it to be a fair process, so I wanted a good makeup of Republicans and Democrats.
Will the senator yield?
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting, when you got up there, you held up the AJC as the reason why we need to do this. Is that not correct?
One of the reasons.
And the story was about a Mr. Jafari, correct?
That's right.
And it talked about an indictment that actually was filed months ago, but just released yesterday miraculously to the public, correct?
Yeah, the senator knows what she speaks.
Did you read the indictment?
Yeah. 51 counts, I believe.
Did you read it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So with
A lot of
respect,
trips to the bathroom for cash money, it looked like.
isn't it true that the allegations of the indictment, they don't make, with respect to the relevant time period, they don't make any allegations with respect to Mr. Jafari getting any contracts with the airport? Isn't that correct?
Well, you know, it's funny how the procurement process works. You have one procurement officer that oversees the operations of all procurement at the city hall and the airport. I don't know how you differentiate the two when you're talking about one city government. They won't talk about it's one city government, but then they all of a sudden, when there's a scandal that takes place, they go, well, we got 2 or 3 different divisions, but we only have one person over those divisions. So I don't know how you supposed to decipher exactly what is airport and what is not airport. I do know it. I did see that that this gentleman has been a vendor or a contractor for the city of Atlanta since 1984, I believe, and he's done business at the airport. I believe it was referenced that his wife is a vendor at the airport as well. So,
Will the senator yield?
Mm-hmm.
So with respect to that, during the relevant time period in terms of the indictment, in fact, if we look back, Mr. Jafari was denied contracts at the airport at this time. Isn't that correct?
I don't know. He sure was a very giving political donor. I know that in multiple races.
So with the senator yield?
Mm-hmm.
So with respect to this being the reason that you need to get up here and you need to deal with the blight that the airport is, really, there's no grounds for that with respect to Mr. Jafari and this indictment.
Oh, it's plenty of ground. This is one example, Senator. This is one example. I mean, you have a procurement officer that is sitting in prison right now that was held that role for almost a decade or more. So that it's just one of the many reasons that we brought this legislation forward.
Will the senator yield?
One more question.
Well, now I'm gonna have to think about it then. If it's just one more,
Well, some of your colleagues want their turn too.
I have no doubt. You indicated about the FAA and how you think that this is just you're going to be able to make this happen. With respect to that, there's actually a guideline on point that says that if the person who owns the airport, i.e. the city of Atlanta, doesn't agree, then they will not approve a deal like this, correct?
There is a rule that they have in place that does say something similar to that.
And so,
unless you're able to make a compelling case.
Right, and you think that you're going to be able to go in and make a compelling case to the FAA?
I think we'll be able to make a compelling case for 2 reasons. Number one, because of the litany of indictments and scandals and FAA investigations, which are actually going on right now for misappropriation of funds to an old law firm that employed the past mayor. That's one case we can make. There's also a statute in the state of Georgia that as a state agency we can move to settle the dispute at the state before going to the FAA.
Senator, wouldn't you agree that if Senators Isaacson and Perdue and Secretary Perdue can't even get the federal government and the Trump administration to help our farmers, that this is going to be a tough move for us?
I think Senator Perdue and Senator Isaacson, in fact, and Secretary Perdue, I don't think our standing with the state with the administration, in any administration, I don't think our standing has been any better than what it is right now in Georgia. Now, will we get everything we want? Probably not, but I know that Senators Perdue have the president's ear, and I think they do consult, and I'm sure they will work something out for our South Georgia farmers. Mr. President, I know there's plenty of conversation. I'll yield the well, and I'll come for a closing argument if you like.
Yes, sir. You have that right.
Thank you.
Senator yields the well. Chair recognizes the senator from the 45th to speak to the bill. We have all the amendments are in, and while we have a moment here, Mr. Secretary, will you read the amendments?
Amendment 1 by Senator Williams of the 39th offers the following amendment: amend the Senate Committee substitute to Senate Bill 131 by inserting a new section 6-6-14 after line 397. Any acquisition, disposition, or development of land within 3 miles of a major airport shall be deemed a development of regional impact under Code Section 50-3214 and for other purposes. Amendment 2 by Senator Jones of the 10th offers the following amendment: amend the Senate Committee substitute to Senate Bill 131 by inserting on line 262 after the word obligations the following: notwithstanding any other provisions of this section, all revenue debt issued by the authority shall be guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the state of Georgia and for other purposes. Amendment 3 by Senator Parent of the 42nd offers the following amendment. Amendment 3 to amend the Senate Committee substitute to Senate Bill 131 by striking out at line 88, elected for 2-year term by a majority vote of the members of the authority, and by inserting in its place appointed by the President of the Georgia State Senate and for other purposes. Amendment 3A by Senator Parent, 42, offers the following amendment 3A to amend Amendment 3 to the Senate Committee substitute to Senate Bill 131 by striking line 16 and replacing it as follows: to exceed $5,000 or 12 months incarceration. Amendment 4 by Senator Jordan VI offers the following amendment: amend the Senate Committee substitute to Senate Bill 131 by creating a new code section 45-12-62 that states as follows: after line 408, there shall be designated by the governor a lactation room in the Capitol building or Paul D. Coverdale Legislative Office building, and for other purposes. Amendment 5 by Senator Jordan VI offers the following amendment: amend the Senate Committee substitute to Senate Bill 131 by inserting the following after line 135. F, any communication between the authority members, staff, and agents and members of the Georgia General Assembly shall be subject to the Georgia Open Records Act and for other purposes. Amendment 6 by Senator Jones of the 22nd offers the following amendment: amend the Senate Committee substitute to Senate Bill 131 by striking the words joint governance plan at lines 410 and 411, inserting in lieu thereof the following joint oversight plan and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Thank you for your patience. For what purpose the senator from the 45th rise?
Point of order. Can I
State
ask
your
a
order.
question?
Yes. Ask your question.
At the proper time, I'd like to ask, I know that we usually do, but we have a proliferation of amendments. At the proper time, I'd like to ask for germaneness on amendment number 4.
After amendment number 4 is presented, we'll take that question. The chair will. The chair would like to recognize the senator from the 45th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to stand here and say that I ask for your favorable consideration of Senate Bill 131. And it seems like I'm always coming up here and I'm offering this historical perspective. I must be getting old. But I think it's unique that we understand where we've been so that we know where we're going. And fortunately, I have had the opportunity to serve with many good people. But unfortunately, we got some dirty laundry. I've served with some very bad people. I remember serving over in the House with Robin Williams. Some of you remember him. I served with Linda Shrinko. I served with Charles Walker when he was in this distinguished body. A lot of these people went to jail. As my family calls them, they call them jailbirds. And we have some jailbirds, and we have a historical perspective. And we do know right from wrong. And we do want the bad apples because we don't want our image ruined. And that's exactly why I'm standing here today. And I wrote, and I'm still writing, an open letter. And I wrote an open letter to Kasim Reed. I'm writing an open letter to Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. And I read what she said in the paper, that she was declaring war. Well, you know, I think that's taking it a little bit too far. We're asking you to come to the table. And that's exactly why the senator from the 25th, I have to commend him. He had a lot of courage. We would never be at this table. We would never be at this table if he hadn't written this bill, because they won't come to the table. But we want to talk about it. And I have to tell you, I sat back there beside Kasim Reed when he was a senator. And I remember when he decided to run for mayor of the city of Atlanta. And it was also just happened to be his last term, his last session, and it was his birthday. And I went to Sam's in Beaufort, Georgia, and bought a huge sheet cake. And it looked like a torch when it was lit up because there was so many candles on it. And I have to tell you, it was unprecedented. Our Senate GOP caucus supported Kasim Reed when he ran for mayor of the city of Atlanta. And then he went on to win as the new mayor. He was the 59th mayor of the city of Atlanta, and we were proud of him. And when he left here, I remember saying to him, there's one mandate we got for you. Clean up the Atlanta airport. Simple business. And we had confidence in him that he was going to do it. But guess what? Fast forward, 2018, look what we got right here. Scandal. Scandal. Mayor, City of Atlanta. So you want to know why the senator from the 25th had enough courage to do this bill? Because we've been talking about the World Congress Center. We've been talking about the Georgia Ports Authority. We are #1 in the world. We have spent billions of dollars deepening the port, improving, building the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Yes, we're world-class too. We're world-class too. They always talk about the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport being world-class. Well, we got world-class authorities too. And his creativity is joining to put these scandals to rest. And the only way we can get them to the table is to embarrass them. Say, come on, come down the street, come one block over, let's talk about this, let's talk about a new authority, and let's see what we can do. I want to talk just a little bit. I've filed these things away in my brain, and I said one day I'm going to have the opportunity to talk about these ideas and these issues. And I put them in there. And it's kind of like a catharsis now that we get to talk about it. You know, all of us go to biscuit shops. You can call them coffee shops, biscuit shops. I don't know what y'all call them. I call them biscuit shops. I eat a lot of biscuits. You can tell by looking at me. I eat a lot of biscuits. But in my county, in Gwinnett County, where I come from, there's a lot of construction workers. There's a lot of people with a lot of companies. And they want to be vendors because we're right near the Atlanta airport. They want to be vendors. Those construction workers, those union workers, they want to work out there. But guess what? They're blocked out. And we know historically, ever since I've been elected, that they have been blocked out and there is favoritism. The second thing I want to talk about is the big guys. We got big guys that live in our districts. We got franchisers. I've got one of the largest franchisers in the United States that lives in Gwinnett County. He's very famous, and guess what? He has been blocked out of the Atlanta airport. He has been blocked out of the Atlanta airport, even though he's one of the top franchisers in the United States. How come? How come? It's because of preferential treatment. It's because of preferential treatment. And then I want to tell you one thing, and this is what got at my heart. For 6 months, I worked on a vendor. I have been here a long time. I know a lot of people. I called a lot of people. As y'all know, I have traveled the state. In Albany, Georgia, I had a group, an NGO, a nonprofit come to me. It's called the Bread House. And the Bread House is connected to Graceway. And Graceway is an addiction recovery support facility. And they use a converted 1908 restored house as a restaurant. They use organic foods. They make bread. They make the best macadamia cookies you ever put in your mouth. They use original source food, the pecans from South Georgia. And they have developed a wonderful internet site. They sell gift baskets all over. You go down there to that restaurant, you close your eyes and you think you're sitting in Buckhead, Georgia, because it is so sophisticated and so beautiful. But guess who is serving your food? The same girls that sat up there in that gallery. They're former addicts. They had substance abuse problems. They are in the Graceway program. But they use that restaurant to be able to go to work and reentry back into society. They said to me, Senator, I've got the greatest idea in the world. These girls came up with this idea with their director. They wanted to have a small kiosk at the Atlanta airport to be able to sell like these energy foods that when you get on the airplane you could eat that cost a couple of bucks. They wanted to sell these pecans from South Georgia. And for people to get on the plane, I said, I'm going to help you. I'm going to find out. For 6 months, I worked trying to be able to get a kiosk for this NGO, for this nonprofit, for these girls to be able to sell their product. And guess what? Nada. The door was closed. Not only was the door closed, I couldn't even get in the door. It didn't matter who you were or what you were, you're not going to get in unless you get preferential treatment 1 block down the street from right here. I'm telling you, we got a problem. The problem is that the Atlanta airport uses the state of Georgia to brand and market them. And unfortunately, they're using our image and our connotations of who we are and what we are. And when you got scandals like this, it bleeds on down. It bleeds down to the rest of us. And we're supposed to sit here and take it. The answer is no, we're not going to. The other issue I want to talk about that I was going to ask the senator from the 25th about when they were talking about who was on the committee. Nobody from the city of Atlanta served on this study committee. It doesn't matter. I live out there in Gwinnett County. They came out to Gwinnett County. The city of Atlanta airport came to Gwinnett County so long ago, I can't even find the records. They bought thousands, not hundreds, thousands of acres. They went to Paulding County. They went to the rural areas when they were rural. They went to Dawson County. They went to Dawsonville. They took our land off the market when it was not even suburban. It was rural. It was rural, and then it became exurban, then it became suburban, and now my county still has on the roll land that is taken off of our millage tax digest so we can't develop it. Then do you think that's fair? And they were talking about these Atlanta people didn't serve on the committee. We have a vested interest in this. We all do, even when you live miles and miles and miles away from it. So I'm going to close out. You know what my answer is? ATL. ATL, this is not your ATM anymore. You need to come to the table. You need to come to the table. Let's talk about an authority. This is not your private bank account. This is not your ATM. This is not your campaign finance. This is not your mechanism to get reelected. This is the state of Georgia. This is 11 million people, and you can better bet your dollar we're going to stand up for it. So with that, I believe I've covered everything. And I want to say one more thing while I still got you here. BJ Pack. BJ Pack is the federal prosecutor from Lilburn, Georgia. He serves the Northern District as a federal prosecutor. Kudos to BJ Pack. You want to talk about somebody with courage? You want to talk about somebody reforming and doing something about good for all Georgians? It's BJ Pack. And thank you, BJ Pack. Thank you, and I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. We have 8 amendments. And we would like to read a couple of new amendments that came in. Mr. Secretary, will you read the amendments, the new amendments?
Amendment 5A by Senator Jordan of the 6th offers the following amendment. Amend Amendment 5 to the committee substitute to Senate Bill 131 by striking line 8 and inserting as follows: to exceed $5,000 or 12 months incarceration. That concludes the order for now.
All right, we're going to start to bring up the amendments to speak to. I'd like to recognize the senator from the 39th to speak to amendment number 1.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I am here today as a senator who represents the city of Atlanta, and reading this legislation, I found some things that seem to be inconsistent with the purpose of the senator from the 25th's intent on bringing the legislation. So this is my intent with Amendment 1. I hope that he will see it as a friendly amendment to help strengthen the ethics proposals that he is, for the reasons that he's bringing the legislation. So what this would do is require any acquisition, disposition, or development of land within 3 miles of a major airport shall be deemed a development of regional impact under Code Section 50-32-14. Any public official, as that term is defined in the code, with any direct, indirect, or familiar interest in any such development of regional impact shall disclose such interest to the Georgia Government Transparency and Campaign Finance Commission, the Secretary of the Senate, and the Clerk of the House of Representatives prior to any consideration of such development of regional impact by the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority. I represent the area surrounding the airport. I don't represent the actual airport, but we all know that as the airport continues to expand, because it is the busiest and most efficient airport in the world, but as it continues to expand, the property and the land around it will become of much value and interest to people looking to start business in the area. And so I hope that this is a friendly amendment to just put a little more teeth into the ethics issues that have been brought forth.
Chair recognizes the, do you yield, Senator?
I yield.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 19th for a question.
Thank you, Senator. Do you yield for a couple of questions?
Yes.
Senator, OCGA 503214 that you reference in this matter, have you read that code section?
Around the Regional Development Authority?
Yes, ma'am. OCGA 503214. Are you aware, can you tell me when it's considered a development of regional impact, what happens then?
Developments of regional impacts are large-scale developments that are likely to have regional effects beyond the local government jurisdiction in which they're located. And that would include areas around an airport, since we're saying that this is a state interest in the airport, so the areas around it should fall under this jurisdiction.
Does the senator further yield?
Yes.
Senator, are you aware that if you bind this bill under that code section, do you know that it requires development of regional impacts requires certain additional sign-off?
Well, that is something that we can look into as we develop this new, as we put this new section in. But if we're looking at putting forth this legislation, because we want to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest and no other ways for people to personally benefit, people in elective office to personally benefit from the airport or from the businesses around the airport, then this is something that I think everyone in this body should be supportive of.
Does the senator further yield?
Yes.
Senator, since you're aware that it requires additional sign-off, are you aware who that additional sign-off is required from?
I have the DCA website right here on my phone with the provisions around the DCAs.
And it requires sign-off by the DCA commissioner, correct?
Yes.
Do you know who the DCA commissioner is?
I have the website up right here, so I can go through anything that you want me to pull up on the website, Senator.
I was just asking if you knew who it was, Senator.
Would you like for me to read from the website?
It's Commissioner.
Inform the body.
It's Commissioner Christopher Nunn. I have a further question if you'll yield again, though.
Yes.
Senator, are you also aware that it requires the approval of 3/4 of a city council if this is a development of regional impact?
So Senator, it is my opinion as a representative of the city surrounding the airport. I have a letter from the mayor of the city of College Park who is adamantly opposed to this bill, and it is my opinion that the city should have an input on what is happening in the land that is developed around the airport if it's going to affect their cities.
Will the senator further yield?
Yes.
So, Senator, if your idea for fighting the corruption at the airport is to require that any development within 3 miles of the airport requires approval by 3/4 of the city council?
It is my opinion that if we want to bring more transparency to this process and really get to the intent of what the author of the legislation is saying, then yes, this is a good idea, and we should all be on board with this if we want more transparency in getting contracts and including getting land and expanding the area surrounding the airport.
Or just open a few more pockets, right?
Senator, you have no more questions.
Thank you, and I yield the well.
Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 10th to present amendment number 2.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of this body. I rise to offer up amendment number 2. But before I go through the amendment, I feel it's important to respond to the senators from the 45th and the comments that she made about a city where I was born and an airport that I love. She stated in the beginning that the purpose of this bill, and these are her comments, was to get Atlanta to come to the table. She also went on to say that the purpose of this bill is to embarrass the city of Atlanta. Those are her words. Personally, I find that offensive that a member of this body would stand up here that don't even represent any part of this city and talk about how we're going to embarrass a city that's been duly organized by this great body. And I would say to the senator from the 45th, it's hard to get anybody to come to the table that already owns the table. Atlanta owns this airport. Some of us in here may not like that, but they do. Atlanta invested years and years of resources into developing this airport. Now it's the model for the rest of the country. It's the #1 airport in the United States of America. Chicago, they may flip-flop occasionally. She went on to talk about corruption. In the time that we live in the last 2 years, what this country has dealt with, the allegations that's been made at the highest level of government, no one is qualified to stand up here and talk about corruption from either party. But if you do, then I'm going to talk about some of the corruption that we're all experiencing, that we've been a party to. Are we in a position to take over the United States of America? Or some of the other cities around that may have malfeasance? Because I can go on and name a whole bunch of them in this great state, even some up in Gwinnett County. Do we want to start taking over school boards because their superintendents are racist, are having problems educating their students? Do we want to get in that business? When we start talking about ethics, I don't think our hands are clean in here either. Some of us in here may find that hard to believe and may make the argument that the process worked and members of this body, this chamber, this state are no longer around. That says the process works to me. And I say the same thing about the city of Atlanta. The process works. I am a frequent flyer through the airport. I love this airport, and I'm sure all of you do. If you're like me, I've rated this airport at the very top. We have some of the finest airlines in the country running out of Hartsfield Airport. This bill simply seeks to undermine an economic jewel that now those up here have problems because one of their organizations didn't get a kiosk, wants to punish them and embarrass the hell out of them. That's what this bill is about. Now, let me talk about City Bill Amendment number 2. This is a common sense amendment that simply says that Georgia should put up or shut up. If members of this body are passionate about the state taking over this airport, then the state should be willing to obligate itself financially to the airport, just like the city of Atlanta has. And if the senator from the 25th isn't willing to accept this simple amendment that says Georgia is willing to put up its full faith and credit, like the city of Atlanta and the citizens of that city has, then I would encourage you to defeat this legislation. And Mr. President, if there aren't any questions, because I take all of them, I yield the well.
You have questions. Chair recognizes the senator from the 23rd.
With Senator Yield,
Absolutely.
are you familiar with the concept of revenue bonds?
Senator, let me just remind you that I've gone through an incident with the city that I represent these last 2 years where I had to deal with the bonding agencies and get letters from them on the impact that any legislation we've had would have on their revenue bonds. I know more about revenue bonds, municipal bonds, than any other kind of bonds, including T-bonds, and I really would hope to care for. But if you got some additional information you'd like to share with me, bring it on.
With Senator Yield? Further,
Absolutely. I yield as long as you like.
isn't it true revenue bonds are issued to generate revenue in repayment from the business proceeds of an authority?
Senator, yes, they are. But there's general obligation bonds that the state can issue that the state full faith and credit would stand behind as well.
If we're going to run the airport as a business and not as a political fiefdom, why would you not allow for revenue bonds to be issued?
Senator, first of all, your premise of your question was if. I reject that if. The city airport of Atlanta, Hartsfield-Jackson, has already been run as a business. So I reject your initial statement and that if that you put there. This city and this airport is run quite well. You don't attain the kind of levels this airport has attained without being one of the very best in this state, if not in this country.
Was Senator Further Yield?
Absolutely.
Why would you restrict the authority from issuing revenue bonds?
I am not Senator, I am not restricting any authority to do any work that authority wants to do. This amendment simply says that Georgia has to lend its full faith and credit behind them.
So you want them all to be state of Georgia general obligation bonds?
If Georgia wants to run this airport, Senator, I suggest to you, why shouldn't they be? And that's just a suggestion, not a question.
No further questions.
Do you continue to yield?
Absolutely.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 18th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do you yield?
Absolutely.
To my good friend, the senator, are you familiar with the bond structure currently in place for the airport?
Senator, if you're asking me if I'm familiar with that bond structure, no. Do I need to be?
Well, I would think so, Senator, if in fact you're going to suggest a radical landscape shift in the kind of bond structure if the state takes the authority. And what I mean by that, Senator, is simply this. Do you know whether or not the city of Atlanta's full faith and credit backs the current bonds for the Atlanta airport?
Senator, let me just answer your question. I don't care about what Atlanta backs. I don't. What I care about is what's in this amendment. And if the state of Georgia is committed to taking over this airport, which is what's in this legislation, then the state of Georgia should be willing to stand behind it, its full faith and credit.
Then by that logic, Senator, the city of Atlanta's full faith and credit should be behind the bonds of the airport, but they are not. And there's a reason.
Senator, are you asking me a question?
Yes, sir. I'm asking you a question because the premise of your answer is false. You want the state to take over. You want the state to offer its full faith and credit if, in fact, we go to that model with regard to the bond structure, but that's not what the city of Atlanta did. And I'm trying to understand, how do you reconcile that difference?
Senator, I reconcile this difference very easily. The city of Atlanta owns this airport.
Then if the
very easily. The city of Atlanta owns the airport. We're not disputing that. And if the state of Georgia wants to own this airport, then I'm saying they should lend their full faith and credit behind it.
But you're aware that the city of Atlanta does not do that in the current bond structure it has. Are you not?
Senator, I'm not here to talk to you about what the city of Atlanta is doing. Please understand what I'm saying. I'm here to talk about what Georgia should do. And I hope you understand that.
Senator, I understand that. But for your suggestion to have some sort of credibility with this body and the people hearing that suggestion, you have to draw some analogy to the current bonds that are in place.
No, we don't.
And what the good senator from Waynesboro was trying to explain with regard to what the revenue bonds in place and how they operate, you're talking about a significant shift if we go forward. And the question is simple. If the city of Atlanta does not offer its full faith and credit under the current structure because it's all revenue bonds, which I've never heard you, sir, complain about that current structure, if we go to a state structure where there would be revenue bonds issued, why are you adding this additional obligation on the state that is not currently on the city? It's just a simple question.
Simple question. Let me answer that for you. If the city of Atlanta had a legislation pending before this body to take over the airport, I would do the exact same thing. I would issue the same amendment about the city of Atlanta and it's lending its full faith and credit behind the legislation as well. Why I'm doing this? Because this is not a city of Atlanta bill. This is a state of Georgia bill.
So you clearly recognize what you're proposing is very different from the way the city of Atlanta has done business and which you have never complained.
Senator, as I so stated earlier, I don't care what the city of Atlanta is doing.
I think
don't represent.
You know what, Senator? I will take that point, and I think you've made that very clearly. Thank you.
Do you continue to yield?
Well, I'm going to continue to answer my questions since he interrupted me right in the middle of it, which I don't appreciate being interrupted in the middle of my questions, my answers, Senator, because I would not do that to you. So I accept your apology, but let me answer that question. Again, I don't care about what the city of Atlanta is doing because the city of Atlanta already owns this airport. This bill, this legislation is from us. It's from the state of Georgia. Now, I do care, and I'm a duly elected official for this state, not for the city of Atlanta. So I care about what this state does. That's why I'm offering up Amendment 2.
Does Senator yield for one more question?
No.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 38th. Chair recognizes the senator from the 38th.
I'm waiting for the person to get out in front of me so I can make my question. Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, is it not true that at this present time, this great state is having a problem meeting the revenue estimate for this fiscal year? I do believe that we need to be concerned in this body about the revenue estimate for this year, what the drastic impact will be on the state bonds. Is that not true, Senator?
Senator, you certainly knows of which you speak, and I agree with you. I believe our revenue during the month of January dropped over $300 million. I do not have the current figures for the month of February.
Thank you very much, Senator.
You're so very welcome.
Do you continue to yield?
I'll yield all day long.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Senator, I was just looking at your amendment and comparing it back to the committee substitute. The full faith and credit of the state of Georgia and revenue bonds being issued to that amount, is there any cap on the amount of revenue bonds then?
Are you asking me if there's a cap?
Yes, sir.
Senator, my legislation, my amendment does not speak to a cap.
Will the senator further yield?
Absolutely. If you'd like to offer up an amendment to my amendment, then I would certainly entertain that as well.
I just want to ask you about it, if you don't mind.
Don't
Do
mind
we
at all.
allow any other authority to borrow on the full faith and credit of the state with no strings attached?
Senator, I'm not here to talk about any other entity in the state of Georgia. I'm here to talk about this bill and what I'm proposing for this legislation. I don't care about those other entities right now that may be operating in the state of Georgia. What I care about is Senate Bill 131 and the impact that this bill is going to have on the airport that I love and on the city of my birth. That's what I care about, Senator.
Does the senator further yield?
Absolutely.
Senator, do we allow any other entity to borrow on the full faith and credit of the state of Georgia with no strings attached?
Senator, rather than repeat myself, I just refer you to my previous answer. I don't care about those other entities. What I care about is Senate Bill 131 and what the state of Georgia is attempting to do to this airport.
Does the senator yield for one more question?
Absolutely.
Senator, do you realize that your amendment, and it may be inadvertently, and that's why I'm asking, gives this authority a complete blank check on the state's revenues, to bond up to the state's revenues. I didn't know if you were aware you did that.
Senator, as I mentioned earlier, what I'm concerned about is this state being willing to stand behind whatever bonds are issued. I don't believe an entity such as the airport would issue unlimited bonds. I don't believe that would happen. And I believe there's a governing authority in place that would make those decisions, and nor do I believe the markets, the bond markets, would even allow it. So I think that's a hypothetical question, Senator.
Do you continue to yield?
Absolutely.
Chair recognizes for the last question the senator from the 2nd.
Senator, do you yield?
Absolutely.
Senator, should we be concerned about other airports around the state being taken over by the state entity other than the Atlanta airport?
Thank you for that question, Senator. This is a dangerous, dangerous precedent in this state, and it's no different than this body trying to take over cities, as an example. And you are absolutely correct. We need to be concerned about that. This is a dangerous precedent that this state would set, and I know it will impact the airport down in the senator from the 2nd district.
Senator, do you further yield?
Absolutely.
Was there a committee report given to all the members of this General Assembly about this committee that met this summer?
Senator, and thank you for reminding me, by the way. I asked the author of this legislation what was in his bill. I asked him to tell me about the findings. However, when he was up here, he danced all around that question, nor did he ever share with me any data that he may have had or any kind of feasibility studies or anything else as it relates to what's in Senate Bill 131. I've not seen anything.
And final question,
and I don't know
Senator,
if any other member in this body has either.
And final question, Senator, do you yield?
Absolutely.
What entity purchased the land that the current City of Atlanta Airport sits on now?
Senator, I would assume that it would be the authority that owns that airport. Is there no further questions, Mr. President?
You have one more question. Chair recognizes the senator from the 31st. Or do you waive? Oh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
Absolutely. Always, my good friend.
Thank you. I think I've only got 2 questions. Did I understand you correctly to state that you did not care about any other authority in the state of Georgia?
No, Senator, you did not understand that. I don't want you to take any of my comments out of context. My comments today is all involved and centers around the context of Senate Bill 131. In relationship to this bill and the debate and discussion we're having today, no, I don't. But I want you to remember, I am not talking about anything other than what's in this legislation and the impact this legislation is going to have, not just on the city of Atlanta, but also on an airport that I frequent quite often and love so very much.
Do you yield for one more question?
Absolutely.
So, without regard to your affection for other authorities across the state, you seem to favor this proposed authority with such love and affection that you would be willing to put the full faith and credit of this state in that authority that exceeds every other authority in the state.
Senator, again, you've taken my comments out of context. I've tried to explain that to you, and we can continue this debate long after I leave this well. I am not talking about any authority or any other kind of organized entity or government entity, state, local, or otherwise in this state. What I'm talking about is the impact that this bill would have on the airport right here in the great city of Atlanta. That's what I'm talking about. In relationship to that argument, no, I don't care about those other entities while we're debating Senate Bill 131. When I leave this well, and I go take my seat and this debate is over, I go back to caring about those other entities as well.
Thank you, Senator.
You have no more questions.
I yield well and encourage you to vote favorably for Amendment number 2 and reject Senate Bill 131.
This time I'd like to recognize the senator from the 42nd to speak to Amendment 3A and 3. We will vote on them separately, but I'll allow the author of both of those amendments to present them.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 131, but do have some amendments to discuss that could strengthen it were we to move forward. But first, I want to go over a few of the legal, practical, and logistical impediments to this bill ever coming to fruition, really, at all. It's been touched on, but federal law prohibits the transfer of the airport without Federal Aviation Administration and city approval. Federal law and Airport Improvement Program grant agreements do not permit federal contractual obligations to be transferred without consent. That's right out of the FAA handbook. So, no transfer of these obligations is possible unless the city voluntarily agrees to assign the grant agreements and the state becomes the sponsor of the agreements to the complete satisfaction of the FAA. North Carolina has been embroiled in a total mess related to this exact same question since 2013, and it's cost both the state and Charlotte, for Charlotte Douglas International Airport, millions of dollars in legal fees. In 2016, the FAA ultimately sided with the city of Charlotte, stating that the federal agency would not accept any applications for change of oversight of Charlotte Douglas until there was a definitive resolution of the dispute. And the FAA further stated that seeking to change an airport's ownership, sponsorship, governance, or operations is a local decision. The state or local government must file the application to the FAA for approval of such a change, and the clarification they issued gave the guidance to the FAA's expectation that all local parties should be in agreement before filing the application. There are a lot of issues also related to the existing outstanding bonds. The City of Atlanta's Bond Council advises that a transfer of the airport could require that hundreds of millions in airport-related debt be refunded, which may not be feasible under the current condition of the credit markets. And if such refundings are accomplished, it will likely be at significantly higher interest rates. You have a letter to this effect from the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce on your desks. Since I'm touching on the bonds, I'll read what they had to say. More than $2 billion in bonds would have to be renegotiated and reissued in the state's name with penalties. Refunding bonds would most likely be taxable rather than tax exempt because many of the bonds are not eligible for advance refunding. These costs would be the sole responsibility of the state and would require taxpayers to foot the bill. So that's just a couple of the legal and logistical impediments to actually carrying forth the intention of Senate Bill 131. Given all of these practical and legal impediments, it seems like all we're really dealing with here is that members of this body or other folks in state government are mad that they or their friends of friends didn't get a contract or a kiosk down at the airport, or it's that folks in this body just can't stand that there's such a powerful economic engine of the state, so well known nationally and internationally, that they're not in control over. And it seems to me that the latter must be kind of what's really driving this. And you know, it is interesting because certainly I would never defend any corruption. Not in this body, not in the state of Georgia government, and not in the city of Atlanta government, and not in the airport government. I would never defend it, and I would encourage all structures that we have in any government entity to have the appropriate checks and balances, transparency, and sunshine to make sure that we don't have corruption. But one thing's interesting. We're going on and on about all this corruption at the airport and the city of Atlanta. But when the senator from the 45th was talking about how she's seen a lot of corruption in her day, I couldn't help but notice that all the folks she mentioned all served in state government. So what are we doing to ensure that there wouldn't be this rampant corruption with the state authority taking this thing over? I think we better put in place our checks and balances, our transparency, our ethics boards, and on to ensure that these state officials who have had a history of having corruption within our ranks are not guilty. So that's why I've got amendment number 3. First part of amendment number 3 would have the president of the Georgia State Senate appoint the members of the authority, because we are the ones driving this bus. So it is going to be incumbent upon us to make sure that the folks we put there are going to have no hint, scintilla, or iota of any corruption. Because if we're going to do this, we're going to make sure it's done damn well. So there you go. We are going to be in charge if you approve amendment number 3, because apparently we want to be in charge. So let's do it. Then the second part of the amendment goes to what the senator from the 45th was discussing. We really need to ensure that there is no corruption here. So we need a very robust conflict of interest and recusal language in this legislation. So the public needs to be aware of communications between the authority and the legislators creating it. Legislators should be prohibited from attempting to use this new authority to deliver favorable treatment to friends, donors, relatives, etc. Exactly what we've been worried about with the airport authority as it stands. And we need to make sure that we humans in this body and in this government don't fall temptation to the same temptations that have afflicted humans in power over the years and generations. So we need to make sure that, you know, these individuals that have served in the past, some of whom have gone to jail, that we just don't have any problem with any of these sorts of things once we take it over. So let's put that in place to make sure that we have these robust procedures, and we will be free from any conflicts of interest or corruption within the state authority, because certainly we know that there have been many state authorities where that has not been the case in history. And with that, Mr. President, I'm happy to answer any questions, and if not, I will yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
Yes, I yield.
Senator, thank you for bringing this amendment. I've got a couple of questions for you. I think
Sure.
you stated your purpose was to allow the Senate to make the appointees to this authority.
Yes.
And the president of the Senate to make?
President, yeah.
Okay. Well, Senator, then your amendment actually allows the president of the Senate only to appoint the chairperson, because you're amending line 88. If you wanted to do the whole authority, it would be line 73
Okay,
through 87.
I forgot to bring the copy of the bill up here. All I have is my amendment, so if
Okay.
that's
Well, I'm
if
just
that's
going
what
to
it
ask,
says, then that's what
do
I
you
meant.
want
That's
to
what it is.
withdraw your
No, I
amendment
do
since
not.
it doesn't?
Exactly how it is perfect.
Will the senator yield?
Yes, I yield.
You don't want to withdraw your amendment? The majority leader's giving you a copy. Would you like to withdraw your amendment since it does not do your stated purpose?
No, I'm perfectly comfortable with what I said about it. Is that since we're the ones on such a locomotive train in charge to take the whole thing over, having some of that authority reside within the president of the Senate seems appropriate. And as it's stated in the bill, I think as amended by my amendment will be perfect.
So do you mind stating for me then what your amendment does?
It strikes out line 88, elected for a 2-year term by a majority vote of the members of the authority, and inserts in its place appointed by the president of the Georgia State Senate.
Yes, ma'am. And who is appointed then by your amendment?
Okay. I've already said the point of the amendment, and I think I've answered the question. Thank you.
Will the senator further yield?
Yes, I will.
So, Senator, I'll tell you what your amendment actually does is allows the president of the Senate to appoint only the chairperson.
We already went over that,
And
Senator.
you're okay with that then?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Okay,
Mhm.
Senator, will the senator further yield?
Yes, I will.
So this actually gives more authority to the elected body, correct?
To
Your
the
amendment.
elected body of our chamber. Yes, it does.
Okay. And this bill overall gives this body more power as well,
Yes,
correct?
and I already explained the rationale for that.
Will the senator further yield?
Yes.
So since the senator is in support of giving this body more power over the authority, can you explain to me why the senator is not in favor of giving this body more power over the full authority of the airport?
I think I already explained both, Senator. The one is because if we're going to be the ones so insistent on driving this train, then we need to own it. That's to answer question number one. To answer question number two, yes, I'm opposed because there are legal and logistical, serious legal and logistical impediments to putting this into place. It engenders a whole lot of distrust. We have worked very well over my time in state government as a city and as a state together. And this is a huge and divisive step backward from that. I think it's extremely ill-conceived, and we need to be careful what we wish for. So yes, I believe we should own it if we're going to go ahead.
Will the senator further yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator, I do believe you have some very good points, even though I understand there was a little mix-up with who you wanted to have appointed. But your points at the end of your amendment about making sure that the legislature is required to be bound by some type of rules concerning the authority that the legislature is not involved in. I think those have good points. I think the senator from the 13th has taken that portion of your amendment and rewritten and included it. And I just wondered if you'd like to sign on to the senator for the 13th amendment.
I have not had a chance to peruse that amendment, but I will take a look.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
We have a couple of additional amendments that I'd like the Secretary to read.
Amendment 5B by Senator Jordan of the 6th offers the following amendment. Amendment 5B to the amendment of the committed substitute to Senate Bill 131 by striking the word familiar on line 10 and replacing it with familial. Amendment 7 by Senator C of the 34th and others offers the following amendment. Amend the Senate committee substitute to Senate Bill 131 by adding after line 69 the following. J, 2 persons to be appointed by the governing body of the county in which the majority of the airport is located and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
I'd like to recognize the senator from the 6th to speak to amendment number 4, 5A, 5B, and 5. If Senator can speak to the amendment in any order she wishes.
Thank you, Mr. President. With respect to Amendment 4, you know, this amendment was inspired by First Lady Marty Kemp, who said on the campaign trail that she considered raising her daughters as her job. She even did a commercial about pre-existing conditions and the fight for them. And let's be clear, what the science says and what doctors know is that pre-existing conditions, they can be limited down the road if women breastfeed and if we support that. We know this is the healthiest thing for babies. We know it's the healthiest thing for mothers. And I'll tell you, I know that the Lieutenant Governor and his wife, Brooke, have raised these beautiful children. And what we all know is that if we can have a place in this Capitol building so that women can then be able to feed their children, then that is an absolutely good thing. And all this does is it gives the governor the authority to do that. So I hope you will support what I am calling the First Lady Marty Kemp Amendment, and I'll answer any questions from the well.
You have no questions.
You gonna go ahead and take her germane this station or not?
There's no questions.
In terms of the next amendment, it is number 5, and I'll just say with respect to 5A and 5B, it was just cleanup of the language. In terms of this amendment, you know, we've had some pretty strong language up here. ATL is not your ATM, it's not your campaign finance. But I want to go back to the preacher of the day who said, "Speak the truth, crooked places shall be made straight." If the stated intent of the sponsor to somehow fix this blight, that is the Atlanta airport, then there should be no problem with my amendments. So what do? They're pretty straightforward. One is that any communications between authority members and members of the Georgia General Assembly shall be subject to the Georgia Open Records Act. We purport to be about transparency. Let's stop talking and actually do something. Secondarily, no member of the Georgia General Assembly may have a direct, indirect, or familial ownership interest in a company doing business with the authority. Let's be clear, if we're going to go in and take over this authority because we think people are lining their pockets, then we have to make sure that the protections are in place so that we don't line our own. Finally, in terms of business, if no business which has made a campaign contribution to a member of the Georgia General Assembly, they should not be able to then do business with the authority. Why is that? Because we want to make sure that we are beyond reproach. As we've said today, all of the members that have gotten up here in support of this bill, this is about fixing the blight, fixing corruption. If that is in fact the case, then this amendment just puts the tools in and makes sure that we're as transparent as possible so that whatever issues that this body may have with the city of Atlanta and how it runs the airport, that it won't happen to us. If there are no further questions.
You have a question.
All right.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
Yes.
Senator, I'm looking at Amendment 5, the unamended version, lines 2 through 4. Can you walk me through, there's a lot of ands and a lot of commas, and I just want to make sure I understand how you think that works.
Well, if you read it, it says, any communications between the authority members, staff and agents, and members of the Georgia General Assembly shall be subject to the Georgia Open Records Act. Too many words, Senator?
No, ma'am. I just want to, does the senator further yield?
I do.
Senator, does it mean any communications between those authority members and the General Assembly, or any communications between the authority members, any communications between staff, any communications between the Georgia General Assembly? I'm just trying to see if communications modifies just the authority members and the General Assembly together, or if it separately modifies each entity in those commas.
What a great question. And actually what it does, it takes authority members, staff, and agents, and then the communications with the members of the General Assembly. Since we have acted in the past to shield ourselves from transparency, I thought it was time we kind of put a little bit more in.
Does the senator further yield?
Yes.
So are you saying then that any communications by members of the General Assembly, or only communications by members of the General Assembly and authority members?
The communications between the authority members, staff, and agents on one hand, and then members of the General Assembly. Communication, kind of a two-way thing. Any of those communications would be subject to the Open Records Act.
Does the senator further yield?
Yes.
So it's not just communications by authority members, communications by staff, and communications by the General Assembly separately. It's not, in other words, if you took the words in between, take the words out, we'll say any communications between members of the General Assembly, would they then be subject to open records? So in other words, communications between members here, would those be subject to open records by your act?
Any communications between the authority and its agents and staff with members of the General Assembly.
So does the senator further yield?
Yes.
So it's not meant to catch communications then that are made by members of the General Assembly as long as they're not made to this authority.
Correct, because right now those are shielded from the Open Records Act. This would create an exception to what we have in place now.
And does the senator further yield?
Yes.
Is it not true that that exception was passed into law under Governor Barnes?
Not with respect to this new authority, because this authority didn't exist under Governor Barnes. So we have to make sure that, in fact, this is the case. Any other questions?
You have no more questions. Senator has yielded the well. We have an additional amendment that I'd like the secretary to read. Amendment number 8.
Amendment 8 by Senator Kirk of the 13th and others. Offer the following amendment. Amend the Senate Committee substitute Senate Bill 131 by relighting line 116 to read, every member of the General Assembly, the authority, and every employee of the authority who knowingly and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
All right, now we'd like to recognize the author of amendment number 6, the senator from the 22nd. The senator from the 22nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is two amendments, number 6. Well, not two amendments, but it's number 6. Number 1, if you look on page 12, line 410 and 411, the first aspect of this says that you would strike the words joint governance plan at lines 410 and 411 to joint oversight plan. This basically talks about section 3, that this act shall become effective July 1st, 2020, unless a joint governance plan is entered into. And so we actually changed that language to joint oversight plan. What that language does is actually kind of bring us more in line with what we currently do today. For instance, we have the Jekyll Island and State Park Oversight Committee, the Georgia World Congress Oversight Committee. We have a Senate Committee of Government Oversight. That is not necessarily just a word, but it fits the language that we kind of currently use. But also, there's a slight difference between governance and oversight, one being more kind of direct control and one being more broad picture, and I think that's actually what we're trying to look at. So that's why I did that particular amendment. And the second part is, of course, this actually is, Section 3 is actually the trigger to this law becoming into effect. And the second part is on line 4, end of line 14, excuse me, end of line 413, neither the General Assembly nor the City of Atlanta shall unreasonably withhold approval of such a joint oversight plan. Both parties shall negotiate in good faith to reach a compromise on such plan. Because this is such a triggering event, we want both parties to make sure that they actually come to the table willing to negotiate. And instead of necessarily being able to just use the media and things like that to have negotiations or to negotiate through the media, the negotiations will actually go through a superior court to determine who actually is using good faith to determine if negotiations are in good faith. So I think this is a good amendment, but I will yield for any questions there are, Mr. President.
You have no questions.
Okay, thank you. I yield the will.
Thank you, Senator. Now I'd like to recognize the author of Amendment number 7, the senator from the 34th. Amendment number 7.
Can I get a nickel's worth of heat, please? Just a nickel's worth of help. Thank you, Mr. President. I stand before you as your favorite Georgia State Senator, Valencia C., Senate District 34, asking all of my colleagues to remember Clayton County. I know that the City of Atlanta owns the airport. I understand that the City of Atlanta has done excellent work with the airport. As a matter of fact, all of my national authorities and different things that I'm affiliated with, I enjoy flying out of my district, which the majority of the airport sits in. Therefore, I rise to present to you this amendment to ask my colleagues on both sides to support Clayton County by giving Clayton County a couple of seats on this authority should the majority party prevails. But should it not, I want to ask the City of Atlanta to consider adding Clayton County to the next part, which I've already drafted a bill asking for services. As you know, recently the FAA has the fundings for the jet motor fuel tax has to be used at the airport. Therefore, Clayton County now has a hole, if you will, when the SPLOST period ends and the loss period ends. We will have a hole to the amount of about $20 million. We are trying to work with the state, and I do want to thank former Governor Nathan Deal for keeping Clayton County whole on the loss portion, and Delta Airline for keeping Clayton County whole through the SPLOST portion. But when those two have been absorbed, we Clayton Countyans have a hole in our revenue stream. Therefore, what my amendment is doing in the second portion is asking for whomever is governing the airport to consider Clayton County for services, since the majority of the airport is in Clayton County. The police would give the city of Atlanta the much needed police force to put, for an example, in Buckhead, who is saying they're needing more police on the ground. The problem then becomes Clayton County's to fill that spot at the airport. That revenue source is a separate budget not coming out of the city of Atlanta, and the city of Atlanta would then acknowledge that Clayton County can then make those services like any other entity in their jurisdiction, provide police, fire, permitting, and inspections in the airport setting. Mr. President, it's another means of doing what the pastor said this morning. It was such a joy for me because I feel like that ship that's been tossed and driven, battered by an angry chamber. My friends on both sides have been tossing and losing all type responses, but I'm a big girl. I chose to be here, and I'm thankful that Clayton County has allowed me to be here for the past 19 years. But while we are having this debate, I simply want to put Clayton County in the mix and make sure that it is recorded that there are some fixes to try to help Clayton County. All we need is a willingness. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield the well.
The senator has yielded the well. All right, now we have amendment number 8. Amendment number 8, I'd like to call on the author of the amendment, the senator from the 13th, to speak to amendment number 8.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you amendment number 8 to this bill, and you'll notice it's also signed by the author of the bill. And what we're simply doing is on line 116, adding every member of the General Assembly. This is kind of the ethics portion of the bill. Back up to line 115, the members of the authority shall be accountable in all respect as trustees, and so we just added every member of the General Assembly to that. So, Mr. President, I ask everyone's favorable report or consent for this amendment, and I'll yield the well.
You have no questions. All right, we've spoken to all the amendments, and I'd like to recognize the senator from the 21st to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak in favor of Senate Bill 131. I want to thank the senator from the 25th for his hard work. I want to thank the study committee for their hard work during the summer on this bill. And I want to thank the transportation committee that spent hours on this bill. The Atlanta airport's a $64 billion economic engine. And stories that happened in the paper today hurt our image with that airport and with our city. I've heard the word takeover used a lot. I don't look at this as a takeover. This is about transparency. It's not about takeover. Nobody can argue in this chamber that the procurement process is broken and that there is no oversight. You have a mayor who hires a general manager as a department head and a mayor that hires a procurement officer. They both report to the mayor. No oversight. That's simply what we're asking for. This bill's not to hurt Delta. It's not to hurt the city of Atlanta. Delta does a fine job running that airport. Here's the good news for the city of Atlanta. The senator from the 51st put an amendment in there that gives them till July 2020 to fix this problem, and this bill goes away. So everybody that's against this bill, you need to urge the mayor of Atlanta to engage on this if they don't want this to happen. I want to talk about another entity that was in the news 7 or 8 years ago, Grady Hospital. Didn't go a week go by that wasn't in the news. The Metro Chamber engaged on Grady Hospital, the business community engaged, and now you hear nothing but great success of Grady Hospital. The same thing can happen with the airport, and they have till July of 2020 to get it fixed. So I would urge the mayor and I would urge the business community, if you don't want this bill, to engage and fix your own problems. If not, this bill will fix those problems, and I would urge your support for it. Thank you. I yield the will.
Thank you, Senator. We have an additional amendment that I'd like the Secretary to read.
Amendment 7A by Senator Kennedy of the 18th and others offers the following amendment. Amendment 7A to amend Amendment 7 of Senate Bill 131 by on line 7 change shall to may should it be in the best interest of the authority. That concludes the order.
Call upon the senator from the 18th to speak to his amendment.
Am I? Okay.
I don't control the microphones.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I offer for your consideration 7A, and I think we ought to seriously consider the senator from Clayton County and her offer of the amendment number 7. It really does two things. If you look at the first paragraph, it provides that 2 people would be appointed by the governing body of the county in which the majority of the airport is located. That would be Clayton County. That makes some sense. I think that's something we ought to give serious consideration to, and I appreciate the senator for bringing that, and I commend the thought process that's behind it. The second paragraph that's contained in her amendment number 7, says that the authority, in essence, shall contract with the county in which the majority of the airport is located for the provision of all necessary governmental services, including police, fire, permitting, and inspections, and perhaps other items. It certainly might make some sense for the county to provide some of those services, but at the same time, I don't think that this authority ought to be bound to have to use one county to provide all of those services. So my amendment simply changes the word shall to may, and if it's in the best interest of the authority. Again, it gives the authority the flexibility to utilize the services of Clayton County, but it doesn't compel them to do so. And so I would encourage your support for Amendment 7A, as well as Amendment 7 that's been brought by the senator from Clayton. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
You have a question. The chair recognizes the senator from the 45th.
Would the senator yield?
I do. Thank you.
Senator, we didn't have this on our desk. So my question is, I'm sorry. My question is, I thought during the committee process that was the olive branch that was reached out to Clayton County, other than what former Governor Nathan Deal did by making them whole in the budget. I believe that an olive branch was reached out. Is that not true, or am I just not remembering this correctly?
Senator, I think the senator from the 25th did yeoman's work in trying to bring the various stakeholders to the table to negotiate various possibilities, various alternatives to the current model we have, which is clearly broken. I wasn't privy to all those discussions. I would maybe ask the senator from the 25th. He may want to address that when he closes the debate. Senator, if that's okay for me to answer the question that way. Thank you.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
All right, we have another amendment that has arrived. Will the secretary read the amendment?
Amendment 7B by Senator Heath of the 31st offers the following amendment. Amendment 7 of Senate Bill 131 by replacing all with any on line 10. That concludes the order.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 31st to speak to his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I realize that you can see it on the screen. So this would just change the word all on line 10 to any to clarify that the airport may contract for necessary services, but not necessarily all of them.
You have no questions. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 36th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I come to share concerns about the bill before us, Senate Bill 131. I've lived in the city of Atlanta since 1967, and I've been paying taxes here for that length of time, and I'm quite proud to be a citizen of Atlanta, and I'm quite proud of the profile that Atlanta has nationally and internationally. I think there's a real lack of wisdom here that we're seeing in this bill moving forward, and I will seek to address that. I don't think it's a far stretch to call this Stockbridge on steroids. And that's the state stepping in, passing bills to override a local municipality, to damage its bond rating, to damage its economy, and to just stick it to old Stockbridge. Now we're going to stick it to Atlanta. Now we're going to stick it to the airport. And we're going to do it under this concern about corruption. Now, I could bring books down here to this lectern, to the well, and show you triple, quadruple. If I went back or had my zealous researchers go back and pull out corruption charges, highly questionable conflict of interest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, here that have occurred under the Gold Dome and have been documented. I could do that, and it would make a dog and pony show, but it wouldn't get at the essence of what so many of us know about things that go on here. It would be a dog and pony show, and that's, I think, what we've seen. I would ask you, how many of you know what steps our new mayor, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, has taken since she assumed the helm of our fair city to address concerns with processes and transparency at the airport? Spend any time on that in your study committee? I really wonder. Well, if the study committee didn't even include a member of the Senate from Atlanta, my being one of several of us who represent Atlanta and Atlantans proudly, to me, that's a red flag that it was a rigged deal, okay? You want a certain outcome, you set it up a certain way. Don't have a senator elected by Atlantans on your committee. Don't have that. No, that would be such a far stretch. How hard to imagine that dealing with the Atlanta airport, that you would have a study committee that has nobody from Atlanta on it. Just defend that for me, please. Tell me what sense that could make, and tell me that one of you would stand for that if that happened to your municipality. If some study committee was convened up here to address your municipality and you were not given a seat on that study committee. Sit with that for a minute and see how that feels and whether you think that's a fair process. Moving on, I'll illuminate you about the considerable number of steps that the mayor has taken since she was elected and sworn in last January to create a process to build confidence and address the concerns around the procurement process. The city made a transition just this past January to a new e-procurement system to automate the procurement process, the exchange of information between the city and its suppliers. The e-procurement system leads to more competitive bids, greater competition, streamlines, and provides more transparency in the procurement process, creates a centralized electronic tracking method to improve accountability. These are real steps. The administration has instituted training for all city employees on the use of this new system, which ensures a standardization of procurement process citywide. Any contract valued at more than $1 million will be tracked by the auditor's office from the beginning to the end of the process, another additional layer of oversight for contracts of large dollar amounts. The institution of a not-to-exceed aggregate amount of $20,000 for all small purchases. And this is citywide, the airport included. The provision of competitive compensation for procurement appeals hearing officers. Posting upcoming bids 15 days early, that starts this month, affording vendors and potential subcontractors more time to prepare and perfect their documents in the process. How many of you are aware that we have retired Lieutenant Colonel David L. Wilson II serving as the city's chief procurement officer since mid-2018? Recipient of the Bronze Star Medal for meritorious service, he supported 40 diverse organizations throughout his career, managed $1.2 billion in commodity service and construction contracts, consistently led teams recognized by the Air Force for outstanding contraction and management. And under Chief Wilson's leadership, Atlanta's Department of Procurement has taken critical steps to improve policies governing the city's public bid process. Does that matter to you all? Is that new news, late arriving news, that he's been in place since last June? Procurement reform measures have been completed under Chief Wilson that include mandatory annual ethics training for the procurement department, standardization of internal documents and templates, creation and posting of a non-responsive determination form for vendors, establishment of new performance metrics to regularly track and measure the effectiveness and efficiencies across the acquisition process. I could go on, and establishment of a new community outreach team within the department, identifying and expanding a broader pool of contractors and subcontractors. We also have introduced under this mayor a new era of transparency in city government with other reforms on strengthening oversight of city credit cards, creation of the role of chief transparency officer, having an open checkbook where citizens can access city budgets and expenditures. I'm not going to continue to go down this long list of genuine reforms led by a mayor who was duly elected and who is working every day to bring the best and brightest into city government and to run a transparent, clean, fair operation. But I don't know if the study committee looked at those things. There wasn't a person from Atlanta on the study committee, and the study committee findings have not, to my knowledge, been placed on our desk. This proposal, frankly, could baffle you if you just looked at it superficially. Why would this body think it's a wise thing to do to ignore the Georgia Municipal Association's very wise and reasoned comments on this bill? The GMA says that the City of Atlanta currently has over $2.4 billion in outstanding obligations secured by revenue generated by the airport. If the state wanted to assume for itself this property and the obligations of the City of Atlanta Airport, it would need to treat such an act as a condemnation, refund the existing bonds, compensate the city for the existing value of the infrastructure and assets of the airport. Is that included anywhere? Do we see that intentionality? We do not. And a very baseline fact about this bill, and some of the smartest people in business in the state have been attempting to tell you this, and that is, right now, Atlanta's bond rating is AA+. That's the highest bond rating available to commercial airports. And that reflects the confidence of investors in the current operating structure of the Atlanta airport. Now, I want to just give you one quick quote from a memorandum that Governor Nathan Deal received from our Director of Financing and Investment Division of the Georgia State Financing and Investment Commission. Here's what Diana Pope had to say in a written memo signed by her to Governor Deal. She said, quote, "It is quite possible that adding a layer of state oversight or changing ownership of the airport will cast a negative perception that could negatively impact credit ratings because of the potential disruption in services and uncertainty of how it may impact existing and future business relationships." This, of course, has rolls on. You disrupt the economy, the economic generator of the airport, and you start disrupting Georgia's economy. That's been brought to you by many people in the business community, but there seems to be a willingness to ignore it. Why would you ignore one of the largest employers in the state of Georgia, Delta Airlines? A CEO of a company known internationally that we're blessed to have headquartered here in Atlanta. Why would you ignore them? Why would you think it's wise to run roughshod over Delta Airlines, who has done and made every effort to bring the information to you that this is not good for Georgia, it's not good for business, it's not good for the airport. You know, Atlanta's been running this airport for over 100 years. And I've gotten the well a few weeks ago, you probably don't remember it, but reading these incredible statistics about how we're ranked nationally and internationally for our excellence. It ain't broke, folks, but some people are mighty interested in getting their hands on the procurement process. Frankly, just to shuck the corn for a minute or two before I take my seat, I think this bill is radical, it's reckless, and it shows a total dismissal of the potential dire economic consequences that could follow were this bill to become law, were this oversight, were this attempt to take over the airport by the state accomplished through law. Why do you walk away and ignore the Georgia Municipal Association? Every county each of you has in counties that you represent, members of the Georgia Municipal Association who are begging you and pleading with you to not attempt to override a political subdivision, a city, in this raw power grab. Just dismiss them out of hand, ignore them like we did on Stockbridge. How'd that work out? How'd that work out? How did that Stockbridge bill work out when we rode roughshod over a municipality? The record's clear. It was a big, fat, flunking failure. That's what this would be. The Metro Atlanta Chamber, comprised of businesses that are vital to the economic engine that is Atlanta, and that, of course, is to the benefit of the entire state. The Metro Chamber, again, seeking to share some wisdom from their perspective as serious people in the business world, pleading not to take this rash step. So what I think we're on record doing here today is looking at a bill here on the crossover day that is radical, rash, reckless. It frankly, I think, taints the reputation of the Senate. Just sit with that for a minute. And if you go out into the community and people say, what are they doing up there? What are they thinking? And if they were trying to do it to your city and to your assets that your city owned, you'd be saying the same thing. You know, since 1974, Atlanta has been a black-led city. We're pretty famous for that. We had the ambassador to the United Nations preside as mayor. We had Maynard Jackson, a noted young lawyer with what they call Old Atlanta, won that seat, won that election, that historic election. And under Maynard Jackson, it was laid down that we're going to run that airport in a way that recognizes and looks for and seeks and promotes women-owned business, minority-owned business, black-owned business, small business. We were going to do business differently with that airport. And Maynard Jackson stuck to that. The city fathers back then, all white, overwhelmingly, were not too comfortable with that. But the leader was elected and the leader led, and we do business a different way at the airport, and that is that minority contractors, women-owned businesses, and small businesses have had a door open. And I will say to you, our track record at the airport's really quite good nationally on encouraging minority business to have a stake at the airport and get contracts. And it had to be very overt and very driven. It didn't happen accidentally. And we should all be proud of that. You sit up here and sob about what's happening in 30314 and about little children living in poverty and what are we going to do with this awful crime rate in these poor sections of our city? Well, one of those is that you open the doors of business and contracting to the minority community. Am I right? That's how assets get built in the minority community, assets that were denied for far too long. How does that record compare with our DOT numbers? with our ports authority numbers, with our different agencies, the Georgia World Congress Center. We'll take our numbers and put them up against anybody's when it comes to women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses doing business with the airport. We're proud of that. We see that as an asset, as a huge asset, and it became a model for how to do business around the state, and around, not just around the state, around the nation. Maynard Jackson is noted for that, and he stuck to his guns, and he had to fight some big guns to get it, but we're proud of that today. Maynard Jackson was our first black mayor. Andrew Young, UN representative, former congressman, our second black mayor. Shirley Franklin, first woman mayor of Atlanta, restored us to some sort of pathway on our water and sewage issues that we faced. Kasim Reed from this very chamber that many of us served with. And now Keisha Lance Bottoms. We have leadership that we can be proud of at the city and not disrespected. And frankly, it may be uncomfortable to hear this, but in the eyes of many, there's an old trope here that's quietly bubbling beneath the surface we fear, and it certainly has a perception, whether it is the reality, and that is the old trope that black people can't run things. Just going to be a mess if you let those black people run something. We got to put the state over there in charge because they'll never straighten it out. You know, they're just going to tear this thing up and ruin it. And that is believed. And that is said in the face of an airport whose track record is incredible in terms of our achievements. So it's beyond me to understand why the Republican caucus and Republican senators here want to ignore the business community, walk out here on this thin ice where you can put the economy in jeopardy. And you know when you start messing with the economy and you tip it over, it doesn't just tip back the next day if you pull back. No, it can go way downhill and hurt a lot of people. So why would the GOP, who claims to be so business friendly, and the state of Georgia, who's supposed to be so good for business, why in the world would you be ripping up the goose that lays the golden egg, the Atlanta, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport? It defies the imagination, and I say to you, we're building step by step here. If we don't pull back step by step, we're establishing a reputation that the Senate is moving in a very rash direction, is ignoring the openly voiced plea of the business community. Don't do this. Bad idea. Flies in the face of our economic success. And also, we can look up at North Carolina and see that they didn't get to do the big power grab with the Charlotte airport. You can look down in Jackson, Mississippi. The state tried to do a grab of the Jackson, Mississippi airport. And the FAA says, no, no, no. And until we're red in the face, we have read you and told you about the stipulations regarding ownership of airports and how the locality has to affirmatively embrace a different owner. But you go ahead and move forward, and I say to you, you're building a reputation that has not typically been known in our Senate, and I hope that you'll open your eyes and reverse course and move away from this effort to take over the world's busiest airport, the world's most efficient airport, the airport that brought us the Olympics, the airport that brought us the Super Bowl. I mean, look at the history, folks. I have talked long enough. I will entertain a question or two, and I may not have changed a single mind, but I must say, I think some of this needed to be said out loud because it's been being said around the corners. Let's talk about it openly. I'll yield for questions if there are none. Mr. President, I'll yield the well.
You have several questions. Chair recognizes the senator from the 7th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentlelady yield?
I yield to the gentleman from the 7th.
Since you brought up the issue in North Carolina, and I believe the senator from the 42nd spoke about the the issue in the state of North Carolina and the Charlotte airport.
That's right.
Just a few questions in regards to that. Are you familiar with how that took place?
I know the outcome. You may know some. You may know some particulars and some details that I'm not aware of, but I'd welcome hearing them.
So, is it not true that in North Carolina's case, a couple of things happened? One, the legislature rushed through legislation to address that with the Charlotte airport. Is it not further true that the North Carolina legislature had no conversations with the FAA about such legislation that they were pursuing?
If the gentleman so states, I'm sure he knows whereof he speaks.
Would the gentlelady further yield? With that said, is it not true that in regards to the legislation that's before us, that this conversation has actually been ongoing for a number of years? I believe the senator from the 25th started the conversation maybe in about 2015. And is it not further true that we had a study committee that laid this out? And is it not further true that the senator from the 25th has been to D.C. on multiple occasions, has had many conversations with the FAA about the underlying issue, and has brought them in on the forefront, unlike North Carolina? Is that not true?
Well, I don't know, but you know, the control of the U.S. Congress changed with the midterms last November, and so I don't know how everything shakes out with the Democrats in control of the House up there. And no, since I've not seen a committee report, and I've not seen any papers on our desk today about the FAA, attesting to anything or alleging anything or purporting anything, there wouldn't be a way for me to know about that.
Would the gentlelady further yield?
Certainly.
I understand that the committee report is not on our desk, but the committee report is a public document. With that said, is it not true that the city of Charlotte actually hired a consultant to put together a report on how the airport structure should be established? Is that not true?
I'm not sure about that. Don't have any knowledge of that. I do know the nature and the complexion and the party affiliation of the people in charge of state government in North Carolina. I know about that.
Understood.
Yeah.
Would you further yield?
Sure.
Is it not true that the report that consultant come back to the city of Charlotte with said this, basically, and I'm going to sum it up very briefly. It said that it found no issues with the city. However, it did find that a state-run authority would be best suited for the airport in North Carolina. Is that not true?
I have no idea of that.
Understood. And since the report found no issues with the city, and we're not accusing, I would agree with the gentlelady that the Atlanta airport is a fine airport, that we have the busiest airport, and a lot of that is due to the airlines that operate at the airport.
Who have asked us to keep our hands off of the airport.
The underlying current, though,
those airlines.
Is it not true that the underlying current is that there are multiple issues in regards to concerns that were on the front page of the AJC this morning? And actually, if we were to print this on one-sided paper, this would be twice the size that it is of the allegations that go back many, many years. In regards to the airport. So there are differences between what happened in North Carolina and what is taking place here in the state of Georgia that I think need to be derived from this conversation and this debate. Is that not true? And
if you have something to share, certainly you could have some time in the well to illuminate people on that. Thank you.
Do you continue to yield?
I'll yield.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 35th. Chair recognizes the senator from the 35th.
Oh, my seatmate, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Will the senator yield?
I yield.
Senator, isn't it true that I am a Grady baby, the daughter of two lifelong Atlanta residents? I was born and raised here. I've paid taxes here as a businesswoman in downtown Atlanta for over 30 years. And my family owned businesses since the 20s and ran very successful businesses in the 20s. In other words, we paid into the Atlanta airport our taxes proudly. Is that not true?
I'm sure it is, yes.
Is it also not true that all those years before Atlanta Airport became world-renowned, if we had any problems, only Atlanta had to pay for them and take care of them? Is that not true?
Yes, sir.
Is it also not true that there's corruption in different businesses in different areas, but that the only corruption here is Senate Bill 131? It's corrupt because it is trying to take over something that's successful for the state to take it over so other people can get contracts and bids.
If the lady so states, yeah, I believe the bill is reckless and radical and dismissive of the fundamental facts around the economy and basic good business practices. I think it's very rash, and I'm in agreement with the lady from the 35th.
Okay, and the last thing, please, isn't it true that so many of us have gotten calls and visits to say, why is this legislation even here when the city of Atlanta has been doing such a good job with the reputation all over the world about this airport?
I agree with you. And you can get a drumbeat going and stir up anything you want to. If you've got enough authority and a process and push out a false narrative and concoct an entire posture around this, and that's what's been done. I've tried to share some facts with you. I've tried to illuminate you about the steps that the administration of the City of Atlanta has taken and about the stature and competence of the retired Chief Wilson, who is running our procurement process, and I would hope that those things are taken into account as you back away from supporting such a radical step.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Senator.
you, and I'll yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. Chair recognizes the senator from the 55th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 131 today. I've sat and listened all morning into the afternoon, and I think that we are just dripping in negative. And I wanted to bring a few positive points to the well today. I think this conversation could probably be summed up in a couple of points. The procurement processes, and one group thinking they can operate better than the other. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport has been owned and operated by the City of Atlanta since 1925. But let me take a step back. One of the things I want to clear up and let you know that I'm that lone vote that was not present on the day that the committee voted for the committee report. But had I been there, my vote would have been no. Ironically, I was at the Atlanta